the
Recording in progress.
city council workshop on July 17th at 4:30. Would everyone please stand for the pledge? Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Would anybody like to lead us in prayer, or we just want to have a 1 minute time of silence? Okay. Amen. Okay. Like to call roll.
Yes, sir. Mayor Dunn,
Here.
Vice Mayor Inskeep,
Here.
Councilperson Mendoza.
Here.
Councilman Lehman,
Here.
Councilwoman Covich, Julie Danowski, Records Clerk. Here. Andrew Hand, City Attorney.
I'm here.
The agenda for this meeting was posted on the city's website, City Hall Bulletin Board on Monday, July 10th, 2023, and amended on July 13th, 2023 to add additional backup.
Okay. Again, this is a special workshop to cover the ordinance on short-term vacation rental property. Just so everybody in the audience is in the right place, if you remember, we had a meeting covering the first portion of this ordinance, ORD 2022-05, and then we had another meeting a couple of weeks ago where we stopped discussing the details of this and just discussed the ordinance in general. Well, now we're going to go back and finish the discussion on the ordinance itself, just so everybody's in the same place. I'm going to ask Mandy in a minute to kind of go through kind of some of the thoughts or changes we discussed, although we never came to a consensus on those items, just so everybody knows what those items are and where we are as a council. Before we go any further, though, I got something to say. I want people to quit not telling the truth, okay? People come to this microphone and do not tell the truth. And it amazes me because it's very easy to figure out who's not telling the truth. All you got to do is go back and look things up. We have a former mayor that has come to this podium numerous times, published things in Facebook, published emails, and sent them out saying he had nothing to do with this ordinance and had no idea it was even going on. Well, there's only one problem with that. When you check the facts, our attorney talked to our former mayor 13 times in 7 months. So I'd say he kind of knew what was going on. So if he knew what was going on, why does he keep telling everybody he doesn't? Okay, these are the kind of things that upset me. The other thing I get upset about is when people come to this podium and they blame this current council for this ordinance. This ordinance was drafted, discussed before anybody on this council except one person was on the council. This is something we inherited. So you folks need to quit blaming us for what's going on. We're trying to fix a problem. Okay? The next thing I got to say is people who write letters to the editor all the time need to get their facts straight. Okay? We got somebody that writes letters to editors every week and don't get the facts right. Because I'm going to read something, and I'm going to tell you what's wrong with it. This week is a prime example where X, a person, who wrote an unauthorized draft of a short-term rental ordinance with the assistance of our city attorney, and basically ran up a $10,000 bill. Well, that's a little hard to believe, since when I reviewed the attorney's bills, this individual and the attorney never talked. So again, if you're going to say something, get the facts right. Don't go from innuendo and hearsay. And I would recommend you get it from more than one person. Finally, a lot of people tell me all the time, why in the world are we concerned about short-term rental ordinances when everybody complies with the law? Well, the answer is they don't. Every month before this meeting, I sit down and go to the Department of Business and Professional Regulation and pull down a list of every short-term rental person who has registered with the state of Florida, which is a requirement of this state, whether Dunnellon passes an ordinance or not. Okay? The current month, as of this morning, we have 84 people who at some time in the past have registered as a short-term rental person in the city of Dunnellon and the county of Marion. Of those, 35 are delinquent, which means they are not current. They set them up, they let them expire, and they're not current. I really highly suspect a lot of those are still short-term rentals, but I can't prove it. But here's the thing that really astounded me. People want to know why we keep pushing for this ordinance. There are 49 people who are currently registered in Tallahassee. Now this will blow your mind. 41 of them registered June 1st of this year, less than 2 months ago. So I would say, if anything, us discussing this has gotten people to register with the state. So where this is going is, I hope you understand, we won't write an ordinance that isn't supported by state law, but we will write one that is. So that's all I got to say. Mandy, what I would like you to do is, again, go back to where we ended before and where we discussed the ordinance the last time and where we ended up, so we can get a consensus on some of the things we discussed and changed. If you wouldn't mind doing that.
What I have here is the ordinance that you discussed 2 meetings ago. And there were several areas that I highlighted because there was discussion, but there was not a consensus and we were not given specific direction on these areas that were discussed. So if you want to start, this is the first area regarding maximum occupancy. And we can start here and then just go, if you want, through the sections that I've highlighted or commented on. And then I can show you where we left off.
Okay. And this is the one that says the maximum occupancy 16, with the exception of children under the age of 6 are not counted.
Correct.
Okay. And we didn't come to a consensus on that?
No.
Okay. Would anyone like to discuss that?
Before we go there, Mandy, would you scroll down just a little bit so I can see the footer? There's not one. So which version is the one that's up on the screen?
This is the version that came from the Planning Commission.
Gotcha.
This was one that was already amended by the Planning Commission. It just doesn't show, this version doesn't show the amendments made by the Planning Commission. They're not track changed on this version.
I'm with you. Got it now. Thank you.
Okay?
And this is the one that was attached to the agenda, correct?
It is.
Thank you.
For council's benefit, the change that is not underlined here, everything reads identical except for, with an exception for children under 6 years of age. That is the sole addition.
Right.
And sole edit.
So I can kick it off by speaking to that whereas clause that we visited last time. We agreed to revisit it because it's, of course, later on in the ordinance, now that we all have the same copy, I'll refer to line. So we see that maximum occupancy again is addressed around line 328. The suggestion at the last meeting was to consider putting this in the comp plan, but ultimately, we moved on from the whereas clause because we knew it was going to show up later, and that's where we decided to talk about it. So my proposal, my suggestion is going to be to keep the maximum occupancy of 16. It will be my recommendation to eliminate the caveat of children. And again, I'll be ready to speak to that when we get to that place in the ordinance.
Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts on that? You want to put it off or want to discuss? I agree with you. I think it was put in. I disagree with it being put in because the fire code says 16 people and it doesn't make an exception for children under the age of 6. But we can discuss it later too.
I concur with both your thoughts.
Okay.
I concur too, because if you have an excessive number of children in there and you do have an emergency, the parents will then have to account for the children, and that does put a life hazard restriction on it. So if you have a lot of kids and 3 adults or 4 adults, it would get unmanageable because you could have 16 people and 32 kids.
Right. Right. Okay.
I do have a clarification question. The way it's read, without the 16 children, is what is in the fire code? Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay. All right, so I guess we're going to push this off until we discuss the 16 later in the ordinance.
Okay.
Okay.
I just made a note
Okay.
in case that's where you go.
Not forget it. Okay.
Okay. And the next section was the term bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
And changes that were made to this by the planning commission is they added wardrobe. I'm not sure how you pronounce that.
Shipper
Shipper or an armoire.
Mm-hmm.
So that was added. Nothing else in that section changed
Okay.
from the original ordinance except for those.
Okay.
It's my understanding at the last meeting that we had a consensus on tying the definition of bedroom to the property appraiser.
Mine also.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought we did too.
I went back and listened to the last meeting and made the notes because I anticipated that we would revisit these things.
Mm-hmm.
And it was pretty clear that there was consensus on that.
Okay. So we want to strike that and just say what is on the property appraisal, right?
One thing to recommend there, council, the definition, the current definition of bedroom, at least the original definition, is tied to the Florida Building Code, which is concrete. I think that the property appraiser will be helpful, the city, in having an idea of how enforceable it is, but the definition is a bit more helpful than just utilizing what is observed by another agency as a bedroom. So I think that while the property appraiser, what I would suggest is the property appraiser being very useful for that enforcement provision and seeing like what is considered a bedroom to double check. I think the more concrete definition would help within the ordinance, especially when tied to state code.
Okay.
But we could also, I could put in a provision that references, you know, while the city can look to the property appraiser for guidance and so forth, you know, or just perhaps we don't include it in the ordinance, but put it in some of the materials. So, you know, somebody who's looking up how many bedrooms can look to the property appraiser for information, if that makes sense.
Okay.
That being said, if you want to try to go with the property appraiser as a definition, I can try to craft one. But ultimately, I've seen a lot of information on property appraisers when it comes to parcels and bedroom numbers and rooms that is not accurate.
Right.
And although useful.
I personally just like the definition because that's when I was studying different ordinances across the state of Florida, this was the definition I kept running into. The one that we have in the ordinance right now without any reference to property appraisal. So are y'all okay with that, or you want to put that in there too?
Which organization did this definition come from, do you think, Andrew?
Building code.
Gotcha. So that's the one that we want to,
It's a good one that's been used in good basis fees.
Does the building code have the limitation of the 70 square feet? Or is that ours?
Just directly from the building code is my understanding. But I
Okay.
can double check it.
Okay.
It's been a while since I've actually looked at it. I can pull it up.
Yeah, when I was studying these different ordinances, that 70 square feet kept popping up. I didn't know where it was going on.
I've got it here that that's the definition of the Florida Building Code and Florida Statute 381.0065.
Yes, that is included within that statute. Site-built dwellings has a minimum of 70 square feet of conditioned space.
What are the general feelings about the changes that were made to this by planning? That's adding the words chaparral or amor.
I guess what I thought we just discussed is all that's going to come out. This definition is going to be verbatim what the building code says. So we lined up exactly the way it is.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's the way I thought we were going to do too. We all good with that? Okay.
I'm good.
What's the next one, Mandy?
So we're good leaving in the language that was added by the planning commission?
No, you're not good.
You're gonna take
No,
that out?
Take that out.
Vacation rental. Vacation rental is a dwelling unit that is also a transient public lodging establishment. And let me see. That's the original language that was in the ordinance. There weren't any changes to that by the planning commission.
Okay.
I believe we had a question about what to call the ordinance, about what to call the registration last time too. And one of our citizens made a very good suggestion, and that is we call it the annual registration fee. Because we were discussing whether it was a registration fee or what it was, so.
Okay, are we moving on to?
Okay, I
registration
thought that was
inspection?
part of that, okay.
Right now, it's vacation rental.
Okay.
That was briefly discussed, well, I have it highlighted. But I'm assuming, Andrew, that is the statutory language?
Right, which is the same thing I'm looking for, just confirmation from you,
Right.
Andrew, that the language is accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that we also briefly discussed when we were talking about this the last time, Mayor, you brought up houseboats. And
Well,
would this definition of a vacation rental exclude houseboats, Andrew? Is there anything that,
I don't want to give inaccurate information, having not looked at it, for quite some time. But if I remember right, houseboats are completely excluded from the term of vacation rental. But I can check into that. And if that's not the case, if you tell me
Sure.
now to add houseboats into it, I can find a way to add it in.
No, I wouldn't want them in.
What we had discussed before was they should be excluded if there's a way to exclude them as a vacation rental, if it's not in conflict.
I believe it's already done completely by the state, but I will double check that. And if the city needs to take action to exclude houseboats, I can include that in the next draft.
That conversation that we had regarding the houseboats was also included some other things, and I know that you did say that you had planned to get back to us on RVs, houseboats, tents. There was a number of like extra structures that we wanted to make sure that we had accounted for.
Like accessory structures, like, I don't know. I mean, I suppose someone could have an accessory structure on their property that could be considered a vacation rental. I don't know if that could be excluded.
Like parking an RV in your backyard and,
An RV or a mother-in-law shed
Right.
or,
Whatever, right.
man cave. I don't know.
I believe there was an email sent out, posted on our site that we saw that said that RVs and trailers were not allowed.
And I think part of the idea is writing it in to keep it clear, so the proposal that I had come across as an example was recreational vehicles, trailers, campers, houseboats, tents, or similar apparatus shall not be utilized as part of a vacation rental. And we had revisited that last time as an addition. So if you haven't checked into it, I'd prefer to just wait and hear what Andrew has to say on it, but I'm only one person.
No, I agree. I don't think they should be included. And Andrew implied that the definition of vacation rental does not include those items. I want to make sure, as long as they don't, that's fine. I know of 2 houseboats sitting on the Rainbow River right now.
Okay, so the consensus here is Andrew's going to look into that, and if there's not language in the statute that excludes houseboats, RVs, accessory structures, if we can write it into this section of the ordinance.
Right.
I agree.
Right.
Registration and inspection.
okay, well, 1 second, please. Andrew, did you confirm that the language for vacation rental is what is?
Pardon me?
Did you confirm that the language that's underneath the vacation rental is correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
While we're clarifying, I just want to make sure, Wally, that as we go through the sections and we're discussing it and coming to a consensus together and the notes are being taken, that all 5 council members are weighing in, whether they agree or disagree, so if
Right.
it's 3-2 or 4-1, that we're really making sure we're hearing from everyone so we don't get to the end
Okay.
and then say, well, actually, I didn't really respond on that one.
Okay. Do you agree with that, Rex?
Yes.
Jan, do you?
And I have a comment.
Sure.
How do we define, or how do we separate those businesses that are providing shelter, a place to stay for transient for transient visitors, and these are, I'll give you one example, and I've been thinking about it often, and that is the Rainbow Rivers Club. They have the cabins on the north side of the river, and I know from my own personal experiences with my relatives staying on both sides of the river at the Rainbow Rivers Club, and they are renting often for a week to a month. So are they also going to have to register as a short-term rental?
Yeah, if it's 30 days or less.
Okay, so they would have to go and show their records.
I would be uncomfortable speaking. I'm not familiar with the Rainbow Rivers Club, if it's even in the city, out of the city, what their business license is like, what their arrangements are. I'm not comfortable into getting things that I haven't had time to research factually.
Yeah, that's why I'm bringing this up, because it gets to a really cloudy area here. I know those condominiums on this side of the river are rented for months at a time, but not
Could you bring us
not
back,
all of them.
like, hard facts on what the questions are related to, if you're specifically talking about the Rainbow River?
You know,
Whatever it's
I'm
called.
just saying, there's a classification there that, are we going to call them a short-term rental establishment or not?
Yeah, it is a good point, because
Andrew has something to say.
Yeah, if I can help with that, you know, this is done, these are state definitions, and while these are not state regulations that are being incorporated here, these definitions are derived from state regulations. So when something is a vacation rental, when it's a transient public lodging establishment, when it falls into that vacation rental umbrella, the city does not have a say there. That is ultimately under the purview of the state. How the city now can go beyond and do certain regulations, you know, that apply to vacation rentals, fine. But the city doesn't get to decide who is a vacation rental and who is not. The definition is just purely to show guidance. This is what classifies it. It incorporates the definition of the state, and that is if it's rented out for more than 3 times in a calendar year for periods of less than 30 days or a month, you have a vacation rental per the state statute, unless there's some other kind of exemption. And so, yes, there are going to be particular establishments that may have a different business model, or maybe there's something where they don't fall under the state licensure, or they definitely do. But it really is immaterial for city's purposes in designing legislation, because whether something is a vacation rental or not is up to the state of Florida. You know, they're ultimately the ones that make the determination with their criteria.
So our hotels and motels, they are also collecting taxes for what we call it, the heads and beds tax. So they're sending in taxes also to Marion County, I would presume.
Right. It's a different classification of business. And so obviously, you know, transient public lodging establishment, it's talking about a very specific, you know, that qualifies under that umbrella. Hotels and so forth are under completely different licensure, even though they are renting for those periods of time, but they're encapsulated by that state definition.
Got it.
So from the city standpoint, it's not something the city has to worry about, at least in designing the regulation. It does need to be aware of it for enforcement purposes, you know, later on, who's who and what is what. But that becomes an enforcement issue as opposed to a legislation design issue.
Thank you.
I have a question on that. You said the Rainbow River Club.
Yes.
So would the Rainbow River Club be considered the entity, and whatever their housing is on the inside is subject to whatever that entity is doing versus a short-term rental, which is a single unit, which, just say like a house, which is not operating as a business, I mean, as a conglomerate?
I can't speak to the club because this kind of has been discussed. I don't know what their business model is
Right.
and how they work. But yes, the idea of a vacation rental is to capture those individual units or a home, you know, within an HOA. If an HOA doesn't say you can't have vacation rentals, for instance, or a unit, especially in condos, since we've really seen this legislation evolve from beachfront communities.
Right.
You know, these individual units. Now, you might have a business that owns a number of units, but I think it's seeing the unit as more of an individual unit as opposed to a rooming and board house.
Right.
Or like a bed and breakfast, if that helps.
Yeah. Okay, next.
Just as a note, Andrew, in the statute, section 51301, which is what I think, 51301, number 11, recreational vehicle park, maybe what that falls under, what Ms. Covers is talking about. I just looked it up really quick.
Okay, I didn't realize we were talking about recreational vehicles.
Well, I don't know that Is it recreational vehicles? or
No,
is it-
no.
It's not a
Yeah,
campground?
she's right, it's kind of a gray area. I never even
Okay.
thought about that, but
Okay.
I understand how they, I've had relatives stay there also.
Okay,
It's basically like a small motel, but with different buildings.
okay. So it's, okay, I get what you're
Right.
Okay, next one was registration and inspection. And the note that I had was change term registration to permitting, but Attorney Hand said this was the standard terminology in the short-term rental ordinances that he's reviewed.
It's standard terminology in other ordinances, and it's the standard, at least the state has taken in writing new legislation, in creating registration processes, ultimately what failed this year. So it would be consistent with what the state used, and ultimately decided not to use. So we can use a different term, we can't use permit, because permitting is preempted to the state. But if there's a word that council likes better than registration, we could use it, but registration is standard, and like I said, the state is using it. So it's the word I recommend using. But you're not married to it, and I've seen other ordinances use different language.
I'm good with it.
I'm good with registration.
Me too.
Yeah, I'm good with registration.
Yeah, well, this came up to, could we call it the annual registration to let them know that it has to be done? It's not a one-time deal, but rather it's something that needs to be done.
Sure. That's fine.
I can certainly add annual onto it.
Okay.
We had also talked, it's a minute detail, we had also talked last meeting about the language to apply for registration.
Which line are we on?
Well, we have 195 is registration required.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps it's not necessary. I'm good without it.
And it says all existing vacation rentals shall be required to register by, and then we left that date blank. And we could just add an annually thereafter, something to that effect.
Right.
My
Sounds
suggestion
good.
for the language of apply came in number 2, initial registration. Every vacation rental owner shall first apply for registration with the city. As it reads right now, it just says register with the city.
So what you're trying, you want to add, I'm a little confused.
Number 2, initial registration.
Uh-huh.
Every vacation rental owner shall first apply for registration with the city.
By submitting to the Community Development Department a properly completed and notarized registration form as prescribed by the city, together with a registration fee in an amount to be established by resolution. So what are you recommending be changed?
Just the addition of apply for registration?
Apply for registration. Okay.
Okay, I'm fine to make that change, and I have that note.
If the council's agreeable.
Would that work better, though, to say to apply for annual registration to let them know that it is an ongoing thing every year?
What I will probably do with the annual, just so we don't have to keep on saying it over and over and over again,
Right.
is just include a provision right up front that makes it clear that it's annual, like
Okay.
from the outset. So basically changing the title and just say registration shall be annual pursuant to the following procedure.
Right.
And so that way,
Covered.
it just makes it a little bit more succinct, so we don't have to say annual registration over and over and over again.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
Yes.
To me, if somebody sees a separate registration or a registration, it's a one-shot deal, then they're done with it.
Well, I will tell you, one of the things with the registration, however, there may be, I'll think about how to bring that back to you, because I think the registration is more of a, they update whenever there's a change to the registration information, but then they pay an annual fee.
Right.
So I'll think about the best way, I think, to deal with that, because registration may not be annual for everybody, but depending on what you do with inspections and so forth, there's an annual fire inspection, that will be annual. But I'll keep that in mind, and I have a note of it, so I'll make sure that it's addressed to make sure very, very clearly what is addressed annually and what is not. And when we come back, we can see if that works for you all, and if there's something that doesn't, we'll change it.
More of a renewal.
Okay.
And in B here, a copy of the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation license as a transient public lodging establishment. I had a note here to add current and active license.
Yes. Needs to be current and active.
Current copy of the,
Yeah, because the way they put it on their website, it's either delinquent or it's active.
current and active.
Yeah, I'd say current and active.
We all agree?
I agree on that, yeah.
I agree.
Here, in F, I had a note to remove F.
Yeah, I don't,
I thought we agreed on that, yeah.
yeah, I think that's kind of a waste, in my opinion.
So I want to inquire about this because I see that we did agree to omit it. And I think that when we're all thinking of lease, we're thinking of a piece of paper with information, it's an agreement.
Right.
But really, and maybe someone can clarify, isn't this the information that it's going to be like posted on a website or on an advertisement? When we look later in the ordinance and we list what is in a quote-unquote lease, isn't that the information that we're requiring to be on a posted advertisement?
Well, I think probably most of the leases for these things are done online, so there's no paper copy, and each one of the companies has their own lease, and that becomes the lease, so rather than them having to deal with every short-term rental owner having its own individual kind of lease, they use something to standardize through their company.
And I'm guessing they change every once in a while too, so we'd have to keep up with the different changes.
Right.
And all that, and that doesn't seem,
Yeah, that's what I remember us talking about.
right, seems pretty burdensome.
Yep.
And G and H, I don't have any notes on. I just highlighted them because they were discussed. And there might be,
So did we agree that F is coming out?
Yeah.
I'm going to revisit that on line 345 and see if my point makes any sense later in the discussion. So I'm okay with it for now, and I'll revisit it
Yeah.
later through a different section,
Okay.
if that's okay. Mandy, I heard you talk about G and H, and it's my understanding at the last meeting, we discussed that this was something that was well within the law and that it could remain and would be helpful in some of the other aspects of the ordinance.
okay, you all agree that those are okay as they are?
Yeah, I am.
Yes.
I am.
Okay,
You okay with that, Jen?
sure.
Okay.
And Andrew, am I accurate in saying that that's very safe to leave in there, G and H?
Yes, I think unless there's some sort of a security type of issue, I don't see that these are standard provisions in the ordinances, and I'm trying to think of, what would be objectionable to it. Really, these are in here, or the reason that they're in here they're tantamount and tied really to the parking spaces and some other decisions I think council has to make if it wants to include in the ordinance. So at the last meeting, I circled it and noted it really depends on, I think, some of the further decisions that council makes. But no, there's no legal issue with, asking for a sketch, and it becomes necessary if you're delineating parking spaces, for instance. On the other hand, if you do have someone who's going to be going in and doing like a fire inspection per se, it may not be necessary if they're going to be looking at everything. It just depends on the amount of paperwork that you want to require. So it's something that, we can just leave in right now, circled, and then revisit it. But to answer the question, yeah, I don't see a problem with it legally. It just depends on how much paperwork that you all want to, be taking in as an intake.
Okay. Let's do it that way.
I think the exterior sketch, if you're doing parking and so forth, becomes more valuable because that's where things are going to be pointed out. But in the interior, and it depends on, like I said, what you do in the inspections and so forth. If someone's going to be going in there, they're going to be checking for compliance and probably will not use the sketch or need the sketch because a fire inspector knows how to be a fire inspector.
All right.
And then E, just point out, was one change made by the planning commission from the original ordinance. That was added by planning. A change in status of licensure, city registration shall not be valid for any duration where such vacation rental is not properly licensed with the state of Florida's Department of Business and Professional Regulation. And then the next section you all talked about was number 6.
So we're in agreement to leave E in, correct?
I am.
I am.
What'd you just say? I'm
Are
sorry.
you in agreement to the addition of E?
E. Yeah, that's where,
Line
I'm
260.
sorry, I got jumped
No
around.
problem.
Okay. Yeah, I'm fine with that. Yeah, I'm good with that.
Number 6, I have a note that says Attorney Hand add legislative language.
This is on the outstanding code violations?
Yes.
I think that Andrew agreed to look at number 7 on inspection. That's where the language change was going to come in, if I'm not mistaken.
I had a note on both of them, but I don't recall exactly why.
I have a note on 7. I don't have a note on 6.
Okay. I may have heard it twice and applied it to both of them.
Okay. Now, 7 just talks about the city inspection, right? It doesn't talk about the fire inspection.
This is, at the time that this was drafted, because we're looking at this language was initial language. The city hadn't decided at that point whether it wanted to conduct any inspections. And so this is just basically placeholder language, borrowed from an ordinance, cut and paste in there until we talked about inspections and what you all wanted to do.
Right.
That being said, there is some preemption language regarding inspections, other than building code and fire. So whatever we tailor should be to building code and fire.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. Now, again, I don't want to speak for everybody, but clearly fire inspections, I think, have to be done annually, and they should be done for these dwellings. And building inspections, I don't know when they need to be done, but you would think when the house is built. But as far as the city doing its own inspections, the more I think through this, I'm not sure we're capable of doing that. Agreed.
Right, agreed
And
to.
I just, abroad say we're going to inspect everything. Do we have the talent to do it without having to hire it out? And I just don't. But clearly, I think fire inspections, that's part of the Florida law. You've got to do that.
And those are required by the state.
Right.
And so they have to get the inspection in order to get their certificate.
Right.
So let them make the arrangements. And we've
Right.
already established that
But it's-
Marion County, through the fire marshal, can do the fire inspections because we've had all that.
And I think if you get a fire inspection, my personal opinion is, I just don't think we're capable of doing this. And we just ought to get it out of there.
I don't think it's a matter of capability.
Well,
It's a
that's-
matter of, you have to have a state license to conduct those fire
Right,
safety.
and I don't think currently, we don't have that. Now, again, down the road, if we add staff and got somebody capable of doing it, maybe, but I don't think we need just a general inspection to be done, personally.
I agree.
I think
Okay.
that's a safe route too with the preemption language. So ultimately, the way that I see it working, from what I'm hearing, if this is the way council goes, you'd have building inspections if there were changes on the property, expansions and footprint, for instance, or accessory structures. You're going to have your typical inspections that come out for that everybody gets.
Right.
But annual fire inspections, which are already done, which should be done commercially for every commercial business, can be extended under the enabling legislation for vacation rentals, to vacation rentals via state statute.
Okay.
There were some questions I had and so forth on that, and what the law says regarding those inspections. Local governments are responsible for enforcing the fire code for vacation rentals. That's very clear. And then when we look into Florida Administrative Code, enforcement, the city is responsible for inspections and periodic routine inspections. It doesn't say anything about annual, but that is the way that it's typically done, and it makes sense if that's how you all want to go, that we can make an annual fire inspection for vacation rentals.
I just
Okay.
want to make a quick comment about it, like an opportunity, because I've heard comments from short-term rental owners about singling them out or treating them differently with regards to such fire inspections. And I'm really proud of this council for rectifying some of the fire inspection problems. We know that the city buildings are now inspected.
Right.
We're getting other businesses in the city on board.
Right.
And so by bringing the short-term rental businesses into this, we're really correcting the problem across the board and really not singling anyone out.
No, we're not. Okay.
Can I just get some clarification? So what you're talking about is only doing an inspection, building inspection initially, and then no building inspection?
No, building inspections when, as needed.
Only when a permit is required, if they're making a change?
Right.
Correct.
Okay,
If
so
they
only
decide
when-
they want to add
only when a
bedrooms.
permit.
Just like anybody would do.
Whatever.
Right.
Okay,
So
so
that's
the
it.
annual fire inspections?
Right.
Okay.
So could we put something in there that says that, what you just said about the building code, but for the rest of the inspections, all inspections will be completed as per state statutes?
Well,
I mean,
the fire code is the federal.
Yeah, the fire, per state statutes.
Right. Okay.
We could potentially put a catch-all in there like that. The thing that is interesting, of course, that the city has its own building code, which is derived from the state building code. Because what the city's required to do is to adopt the state building code, and they can make a few changes to it. So ultimately, that becomes the city code, but the city has to enforce it. So if we just tag it to the state, it makes it a little bit unclear. But I can think of some language to, to make it clear. And even if some of these things would be a bit confusing in the legislation itself, one of the things that can be done is it can be, an information sheet, and it can be handed to a vacation home just to assist them in determining what they have to comply with.
Right.
So I can take a look at that, and then, once this ordinance is done, we're also going to probably have to take a look at informing vacation rentals so they can best comply, because that is the ultimate goal. And if it's something along those lines, it might be something that fits better in that, we can certainly place it in there.
Okay.
I have a question on number 6. Basically, my question is number 6 legal? Because it says, the city shall not process or renew if the property has any resolved code violations or code enforcement liens. Does that line up with every other business that gets, has to annually renew their licenses or tax? I mean, if I'm a STR owner and I have an outstanding kind of, almost, I'll use the word trivial violation.
Your grass wasn't mowed.
Right, something like that.
No, and that may be one of the areas that, could invite some issues, simply because when you do have a business who comes in for a BTR, for instance, to operate, you can't look at whether or not there's a code violation and so forth to issue that BTR. Ultimately, that BTR has to be issued. But, if there is a unresolved code violation, there's a method to prosecute that. So
Correct.
that's something we, could take out or take a look at. It is included in other communities' legislation, but as we've kind of discussed and pointed out, sometimes that's not the,
Right. Does,
the best thing to go by.
I'm confused about what you're getting at.
okay, if I'm an STR owner and I come in here to do I've already registered, now I'm doing an annual registration, and I have some kind of code violation out there. It's already on the books. This is how you resolve this code violation. Let's just say I got 30 days to resolve it, but I need to re-register before that 30-day period. I'm into day 10 or whatever. And now I'm getting told I can't do my annual registration because I haven't fixed this code violation.
Okay.
Just seems a little heavy-handed to me.
Yeah, I would, almost be,
We already
be
have-
able to renew it, and if they don't fix it,
Follow the code process.
then you have a problem.
Right. But this should not be short-term rental, this should not be an ordinance driving
Right.
codes for short-term.
I think that would be treated like,
Right. So I guess my recommendation based on this conversation would be to remove number 6.
Agree?
all right, I agree. Y'all good with that? Jan, you good with that?
Okay.
All right, we'll just take it out. It is a bit confusing.
Okay, so I have number 6 we're removing, and Andrew is going to clean up number 7.
So it'll be a little bit more than a cleanup, because it'll be a complete rewrite of the process tagged to fire inspections.
Okay. Okay. Moving on to line 328, maximum occupancy.
328.
Mandy, before we go there, could I get some guidance elsewhere? Would that be, on the minimum life safety requirements, there was some discussion about taking these out. These I can take out because these are included within the NFPA regulations. Can we take out that section? The minimum life safety requirements?
You start at line 304.
Correct.
304, mine's a slightly different version.
Okay.
Mine's 309, yes, looks like
Okay.
304.
Starts with swimming pool, spa, hot tub safety.
But you're saying these are all part of national fire safety stuff, right?
Well, swimming pool, spa, hot tub safety, that's state statute, but smoke and carbon monoxide, fire extinguisher, egress and so forth are all part of 69C, and I would reference that. That's all under the umbrella of the NFPA, and I would reference the exact Florida Administrative Code provision within the whereas clauses, because ultimately that's what the fire inspectors, since now that we know we're going to do fire inspections,
Right.
this becomes less necessary since fire
Sure.
inspections. When this was written, it wasn't known whether or not there were going to be fire inspections. With fire inspections, I think this can come out.
Correct.
And the swimming pool and so forth, that is already part of state statute, and so that can go on some of the information that's being handed to the short-term rental owners, that they need to comply with these things.
So then you're,
Question on that.
Who does these swimming pool, spa, and hot tub safety requirements? Would that be Marion County's fire safety, or is there somebody else out there that drives around and checks people's swimming pools if they're going to be used by people who are paying for the short-term rental?
It's part of building inspections, for certain. So,
Part of building
Part of building
inspection.
inspections, right. When a pool is installed, it has to be inspected for those requirements.
Okay, another question is, I don't know, does the city of Dunnellon, somebody wants to put a pool or a spa or hot tub on their back porch, does that person have to get a permit to do that here in the city?
I believe so.
I think they
I'm
do.
not talking about building the porch, I'm talking just about putting the hot tub unit in. They would have to,
If it requires an electrical,
okay, electrical
it
hookup,
might, yeah, if it requires a special,
that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, I would think, because those things run a lot of
That would
power.
be an electrical inspection.
And they're wet.
Yeah, very wet.
So I'm hearing a bit of a consensus that some of the council is agreeable to remove these specific minimum life safety requirements. I feel like it goes a little bit against what we talked about of trying to put things within here that make it clear to the short-term renter owners what needs to be done without them going after the administrative codes or the Florida state statutes. So I'm not going to oppose it if everyone's in agreement that it should be removed and Andrew's agreeable to making sure we're clear that short-term rental owners must be inherent with Administrative Code 6960, 6943, and the Florida Statute 515 for the pools are clearly in there, then I'll be okay with removing this section. But I just wanted to put that out there because I do think that one of the benefits of having it there was that it was some detail for the short-term rental owners.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, if any of these change throughout the years, then we're going to have to update this document also. So somehow we're going to have to keep track of any changes, and that'll be done automatically through the fire inspector's office.
What I think will be most helpful, and what I would propose in the second part here, I know from speaking with all of you that it's paramount that people, know what to comply with, and not everybody's going to be able to go and pull up administrative code.
Right.
I think the city's website is going to be a really big help, and I've seen some really good websites with some of these communities that have adopted stringent and less stringent short-term rental regulations. Because when you click on those websites, you can go and you can see you have to comply with this, this, and this, and that rental operator will be able to click on, okay, FAC 69. There might be like a checklist there where the city can make it more legible and put it on a page. Now that would need to be updated if the city created the document. We can also include links to those. And that way someone can see everything that they have to comply with. And it doesn't become, ultimately this ordinance, I will tell you, there are going to be more whereas clauses added. This is going to become a very long ordinance on paper, but when it gets codified, it should be very short. Most of it's going to be those whereas clauses. So providing the information through a different means allows the homeowner the ability to see all of that without having to actually read it in the regulation itself. And I think that'll really help.
I agree.
Thank you.
So what was the consensus?
I thought we were taking it out.
I'm good.
fine with
Yeah,
that.
okay.
Taking this out, just doing it by reference, okay?
I will make a note, though, that somehow the city needs to make people aware of what rules need to be complied with, and I can assist with that later on, or we can figure out a different way to consolidate those materials.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, in this day and age, the links sound real favorable.
That's right.
and just because you all wanted to see the differences between the original ordinance that went to planning, there was one section that planning removed under this section that reads battery-powered emergency lighting of primary exit. Battery-powered emergency lighting which provides illumination automatically in the event of any interruption of normal lighting shall be provided for a period of not less than 1 hour to illuminate the primary exit. That was removed. If you're going to remove that entire section, just trying to keep y'all aware
No, no,
of what
thank you.
has changed between the original.
The fire code itself says it has to be hardwired.
Right, so
So that
that,
just eliminates the whole issue.
right.
No, I agree with you, because I did remember that was changed.
Okay. And then the next, are we done with that one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and this is where we left off at the last meeting, this section regarding maximum occupancy.
Okay.
And the language before read, it did not include children under 6,
Right.
and that was added.
Okay. I think it ought to be removed. Because I go back to what you said, Rex, when you have 16 people and all of a sudden you have a lot of children on top of that, it's just, in a crisis, it could get
In a small area.
extremely dangerous. And I think, 16 people is a lot of people
I
in
think it's
house.
just the law. I think we should just stick with.
Well, that's what the law
16 's
says.
law, and that's the law. It looks good.
Yeah, that's the way I'm to it. I mean, 16 is the most you can have under the fire code, period.
I'm fine with that.
Okay? We all
So
go
we're
with
gonna strike B, the children under
Yep.
6?
it? I think we should.
I agree.
Are we striking A?
No, I think the rest of that's pretty much what the fire code says. It says 2 per bedroom plus an additional 2 per property. And then
Or 16.
16 is the max.
And then take out children under 6.
Right. Because again, that is the way the fire code's written.
And that's the last of, that's where we left off.
Okay. Lease requirement, okay.
So, Wally, this next section goes, I think it ties back to that piece that we omitted at the start that I was speaking about, the lease agreement.
Right. By not including it?
Right, so we
That one,
we omitted this on line 224.
Yeah. I
Now,
think that was the lease they had to turn in when they did the registration.
Right, that's what that was, a sample lease. And we decided that since a lot of these are handled through these various organizations, they might not have a copy of the lease that they could give us, because there really isn't one unless they go online and fill one out in a dummy.
I think that the term lease agreement is kind of loose.
Right.
So then when we get to this section that we're at now, line 339,
Okay?
it talks about what needs to be contained in this agreement that we're loosely calling a lease.
Mm-hmm.
We might also observe that this is the same kind of information that a short-term rental owner is posting to advertise their rental.
Right.
In statute 509-101, it says that they're going to need to maintain records of certain things
Mm-hmm.
for several years based on the guests that, so it's my feeling, and please correct me if I'm wrong, and I'll let it go at that point, that these next requirements, A through H of the lease requirements, is helping short-term rentals understand what would need to be posted in your advertisement. Am I understanding this properly or not?
I think the design of, these provisions come from those communities that want to see everything, that want to have their hands in what is going on. Now, I think if anything is going to be preempted in the future, it's going to be the advertisements, because, I think I've seen some regulations that just require the state registration number on the advertisement, and of course, there'll be how many bedrooms, I guess that depends on what they put in their advertisement. But this is more part of that paper trail that's requiring, the city telling the short-term rental what needs to be in the lease. But if we have a maximum, I guess it's up to council. It goes a little bit beyond, what I'm getting at is it goes a little bit beyond advertising, because the city is stating what needs to be in the agreement.
When someone advertises short-term rental, I would like the person who is interested in renting it to be aware of the maximum number of occupants for the unit and the maximum number of parking spaces associated with the unit, because as I'm booking for this short-term rental, I don't want there to be any surprises on the other end of how many people I'm bringing and how many cars I'm driving. So I don't know if that fits, maybe that comes in somewhere else, but I'll just listen for a while.
No, I agree with you, and I think if you have, this is the problem I have, when we do short-term rentals all over the place, Kathy and I, we have dogs, okay? The one thing we always check, will you allow a pet? And that would, again, if some do and a lot of them don't, I can tell you they don't allow pets. So, is that something that goes here? I agree with you. Where do we put something like that?
I think we could take out these lease requirements. A lot of this has to do with some of the personal information, which I think, as I understand, has been objectionable, and I understand that council's had some comments on taking some of that out. As part of the registration process, we can certainly ask for what is the maximum number of occupants that we're looking at. And, they can provide that number, and if the property appraiser says otherwise, we can ask, well, why is this number different than this number? And they could provide some additional, backup for that without having to actually look at a lease, since, they may have a particular rental that works with Airbnb, VRBO, and they may rent it out themselves. And that could, end up, the city might keep in a lot of records that it doesn't necessarily want to keep, if that's the case. But I think if the city doesn't want to have all that paperwork, we can still look at, requesting information on parking spaces and on occupancy outside of having a lease agreement form.
I can tell you from a records management perspective, I do not want to have to be responsible for maintaining and every single lease of every single short-term rental.
Right.
I agree with that. It's,
if that's what this is doing, but I see it says the city reserves the right to request and receive a copy of any vacation rental lease or rental agreement.
That's where I was going too. This is asking that they be memorialized so that they are accessible at some point in the future. And that's going to, I agree, some of this information that's asking for, I understand why there is a bone of contention about it. But it seems like to me we got off track from what this is really asking, and it's really asking that the records be memorialized by the owners, whether that's done through Airbnb, VRBO, or whatever.
The state does require record keeping for a period of 2 years.
And that's kind of where I was going. I was guessing that there was, I was going to ask, right, the next thing I was going to ask was that, is it already required by the state anyways? The next thing I was going to ask is, what are we going to do with this information? Right.
It is a requirement of federal law to keep all your tax records for 3 years.
Right.
For the owner to keep it.
That's the owner.
The discussion
Right.
is
That's not us.
Right. So to me, it's already taken care of.
Yep.
This could all be struck from the ordinance.
Well, that's what I was thinking, because it would shorten this ordinance. I mean, these are the owner's responsibilities. I agree with you, Mandy, we don't want to take on that responsibility of maintaining all the records.
This between the owner of the state, the owner of the IRS.
Right.
And if we're looking for the owners to do something else, we're asking for a lot of burden on their part for something that's not gonna.
Right, I mean, I would just say, they keep whatever they need to support their
Exactly.
records. So are you thinking, what I think you're saying is take section
Take it out.
3 and just take it out?
Correct.
That's what I'm thinking.
So is there going to be another, and maybe this is an obvious thing from a short-term renter owner's standpoint, I don't know because I don't do it, that somewhere it will be said on the front end, what's the maximum occupancy, what's the maximum for parking? I like G, the statement that this should not be used for commercial use.
Right.
Or there was another, planning had worked on that piece. Is that going to be integrated in some other way up front?
It could be, because when I look at G, G really doesn't belong here. G is saying they want a statement that the unit shall not be used for commercial use, but when you read 3, which is what the whole thing is about, they're asking for agreements to be memorialized, and so I'm not sure what making a statement has to do with memorializing a document.
What that statement would be doing was, it's a required lease term under some codes that we've seen. So in other words, they're saying you've got to have a lease and this is what's got to be in it, and you have to have this requirement in there. The
Right,
thing
but
about
that's-
it is a nice term, but the weakness of it, and all legislations have some weaknesses and so forth, if that's part of that, it becomes really a term for self-enforcement as opposed to city enforcement. Because the city can say, hey, you can't do a commercial operation here because it doesn't comport to zoning. This is simply stating that we're going to specify what's in your lease, so if somebody does do this, then they're in violation of the lease. But then the city doesn't have an enforcement mechanism there. Their enforcement is via the code.
Right.
So, again, this is what some communities have put in there, but it doesn't necessarily help the city out, especially if you have a really good information system that tells people you can't do that anyway.
Right.
I have a question on G, the copy I've got. It says, the rest of the statement was, shall not be used for any commercial or non-residential use, including the property as a party, event, entertainment venue, or social use. Do we want to continue with something like that to clarify it, or would we just, or will the commercial aspect, because I know that that's a big concern of people, is that people rent, sometimes they rent these things to have the party in our neighborhood that they can't have in theirs.
That could be part of the information, I think, that is handed out. In any case, it's not going to be legal under the zoning,
Okay.
because anywhere where these are permitted and so forth, you can't,
Okay.
have a commercial operation.
And that was actually stricken by the planning commission.
Yeah, I saw that, I just wanted to make
Okay.
sure, because I know that that's been one of the big complaints about it, is the excessive noise. And somebody getting the house for a recurring venue, and then, well, they're leasing the house, but then they're charging them extra for things that go on during the lease.
So would someone clarify, where are we at with G? Are we going to leave that in or strike it out?
I thought we were striking 3 altogether.
That's what I thought too.
We're striking out G.
Right, because
Three, lease requirements.
everything under 3,
Oh, it's going out, okay.
alpha through H.
Everything out of 3
Yeah.
is out. Got it.
Can
Thank you.
we put this commercial question you just raised, could that be a whereas statement, Andrew?
I can address it elsewhere, and, that's one of those things, some of this, I think you'll see that some of these things will, depending on the decisions you make, will of course have to come back into a different section.
Well, that's
If you get rid of the lease, it makes sense to get rid of it.
Right.
But, we can address that via whereas clause, we can say you have to comport with zoning, parking, as I mentioned, that's gonna come up in a second, and we'll see where you all go with that.
Right.
But if we don't have it in a lease, we'll need to have it elsewhere. And then H is a requirement regarding a copy of a document, and that's something that you can require, someplace else, or just simply add to the city's website. So I think that's very pertinent information, because that's advising visitors on noise ordinances, on wildlife in the Rainbow River, people who may not be from here. So this is one of those that, I see coming back, if you all see it coming back too, just in a different spot.
Okay,
Right.
all right.
Just another quick question on E before we get rid of it. The 1E, a statement that all occupants must evacuate from the vacation rental following an evacuation order. I think in terms of hurricanes, we may want to keep that in, because there will be somebody that says, you can't make me leave. If for some reason, maybe for severe flooding for a storm, we may want to put that in somewhere else.
Yeah, I agree.
But
I agree with you.
Again, these are just statements that are being put into a lease, so it's requiring a private covenant that the city doesn't have enforcement. The city would never have the ability to enforce that lease.
right.
But the city does have the ability to say, no, you've got to go if there's an order that the city
Okay, so
has
we do
authority in. So no matter what, the city still has that authority.
Okay.
We've just seen, this is an example of where a community, these are directly taken out from the community, where they have decided that, hey, you're going to do this and you're going to put this in your lease. And so it is moving over from city regulation into that private type of regulation. So if we're not doing that, it doesn't change anything from the city's enforcement standards.
Okay.
It's just,
I just want to make sure we didn't give up our right to tell people that, hey, you have to leave.
these are all private covenants, and so by removing them and placing them somewhere else, it really puts them more in the city's purview. It's not bad that they're, that these are requirements and that some communities decide to do it that way. That's just the way that they decide to do it, and I wanted to provide you with that option. But I like it better when the city has control over it.
Let's see.
Right, and again, I'll beat this horse one more time. 3 is asking to memorialize documents, but many of the elements under 3 are dictating what needs to be in the lease, so it's not the same.
Yeah, that's,
It's essentially double regulation, because the city, we're going to enforce this no matter what. But then the city also saying, you have to, whether you enforce it or not, you have to have it in your contract.
Right. That makes sense.
Okay, just so I'm clear, we're removing 3 altogether with the exception of G and H, which will be added in elsewhere. Or H, some sort of document separate and apart from the ordinance that would just identify city regulations to educate the owner and the tenants.
Right.
That's correct.
That's the way I got it.
I have a comment on a statement that a unit shall not be used for any commercial use. There's a business out there, people run what's called retreats, where they would work with a corporation to take certain persons to a certain place, not just for recreation, but also for business discussions and so on. And that would be a commercial use, and I don't, to not allow that, could be defined, to not allow that, and it is a commercial use because you're having an agent work with a corporation. I just think the whole thing should be struck out, not for any commercial use.
Right, we've already determined that short-term rentals fall underneath transient business. Business is commercial, so I guess I'm confused by the whole thing.
Well, I think it was intended to tell the client that the client cannot come there and use the property for a
As a wedding
commercial
venue.
use.
Right.
The renter,
Right.
right,
So
not the
whoever's-
owner, the
Yeah.
renter.
So the tenant can't come in and sell hot dogs out of the short-term rental.
Right.
That's the way I interpreted that language. You can't come in there and run your business out of that rental. But, I mean, that can be addressed in
So-
elsewhere.
Well, actually, Andrew, wasn't there a legislative act that says you can run a business out of your residence?
There, in the last session, yes, there was a specific, under some conditions, you can, trying to remember the exact name of it. Not home, it was something like home businesses, but the legislature called it something a little bit different. And stating under certain, if a business fit within certain parameters versus, trips people visiting and was within a certain size and so many employees, yes, you can have that as a home business. Short-term rentals are specifically excluded from the definition of that. But I understand what you're saying, because in looking at free speech and so forth and commercial speech, I mean, you may have a situation, we came across this with Blue Run Park. If someone is using a laptop or just conducting business, or if, for instance, an attorney or someone goes to
I'm thinking more in terms like people who call them halfbacks. Half the year, someone here in Dunnellon is going upstate to another home that they, rather up to a northern state where they own a home.
Mm-hmm.
But when they're back here in town, let's just say they're cutting hair, and they would have a business license, well, that's commercial use.
That's true, but it's not transient lodging. That's the difference. Like if you have a business and you're cutting hair, you're providing a service. Whereas the short-term rental covers transient lodging where people are staying in the home overnight, and therefore it becomes a different.
Then I would go back to my example of the leasing your STR as a retreat, place for a retreat for a corporation.
If I can just butt in, just listening to all the discussion that's going on around G, there's quite a bit of confusion. That means it's actually pretty loose. And if it's no more explainable than that by any of us up here, it probably doesn't belong in here.
I agree.
Yep.
I think the idea, with it is, while it is very clear what ultimately becomes a commercial activity, we could have a very, very long discussion on it. We did certainly with Blue Run Park and commercial free speech. But the intent, of course, here is just to prevent people from essentially having charged parties and so forth, and some of the problems that we've seen in other communities. I haven't necessarily heard of any reports of that here, but again, something we want to make an option available. But again, this is something that goes in the lease, which is more prescribed information that goes to a particular renter, and we can control that via the website and simply say that you can't do anything that's inconsistent with your zoning and state law. If there is some sort of a local business that can operate pursuant to state law, or if someone's coming in and just working on their laptop to work from home, that's not going to fall under that. And so it just becomes a way that we let people know, what is allowed and what's not allowed, and that doesn't have to be, regarding this provision. It can be regarding that information. Does that help? Make sense? Because the idea, again, is not to prevent, somebody from doing work on their laptop and so forth. We can come up with some, really pointed examples. It's just to prevent, those big parties and entertainment and so forth where people are charging $5 to get in the door. I've seen that a lot in beach towns, believe it or not.
Sure.
So that's really what the regulation is designed to encapsulate in a lease.
So where are we at with all that said?
So if I want to advertise a short-term rental to say that this is a great venue for a retreat or a wedding or a conference, is it okay for someone to market their short-term rental as a place for a venue for a retreat or a conference or
Yes,
a
because
large gathering?
it's being used, as long as it's used as a residential use. So when it goes beyond that and it's used commercially, that would fly in the face of the zoning regulations, that's when it becomes a problem. And that's when, someone's charging money at the door for something else. That's not a residential use. That goes beyond that.
Okay, and I feel like that's what this G was targeting.
Exactly.
Are we striking that? We talked about putting it somewhere else to address commercial use. Now we're talking about striking it altogether?
I am. I think if we have an issue later on, we can address the issue.
I would recommend we strike it, because I think in the future, it could be challenged legally.
Yeah, let's take it out.
And I would just say, before we throw out, I think it could be challenged legally, or maybe it would, I would just say, I guess I would ask factually, because I know a lot of us have read these cases, has this been challenged? What has the outcome been? I don't want to get into a gray area where we say, oh, that sounds scary, let's not do that.
Right.
Let's really base it on fact and on what we've seen happen with real cases.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm good with that. I just don't see the statement doing anything for us. I see it causing a lot of confusion as it has up here.
Once you take it out of the lease, I think it does, because the zoning regulations stand for themselves. This statement has value if you're going to require a lease, and you're going to require that certain elements are within that lease. But in the absence of having a lease and so forth, it's better addressed via the zoning regulations and via
With you.
information.
Gotcha.
Would be my
Absolutely.
I agree, yeah, let's just take it out. Okay. So we now to parking?
I think we're at H, actually.
Oh, H, okay.
When I read H puts burden on the city. And I don't see what that, I don't see what that burden's gonna do for anybody. I just don't see people getting on the website to see when trash day is. I don't see people getting on the website to see feed or don't feed alligators. And the city, when I read this, the city is required to, this says the city is, will supply all these documents on the website and put them out there. Make available to the rental owners, and I just don't see it getting used.
And I say that if we don't have some type of expectation where we put some of these basic rules together that we have in our city, then what are we doing to educate people and set any expectations for when people come here?
I agree with the statement, I just don't see this being the vehicle that makes that happen.
Okay,
I just don't see anybody coming here, getting on the website.
I think we could clear it up by saying a copy of or something to be supplied by the renter, and make it their responsibility to put this information in, because this basically says that the copy of the document to be supplied by the city, which includes this, and that's not our responsibility, that's the person who's running the short-term rental.
Right, we don't ask that from the hotels, we don't ask that from the motels, Rainbow River Club doesn't ask that. I just think we should be somewhat consistent across the board.
And I think that the second part, so if it said a copy of a document to be supplied by the renter, which includes all these things, and where it says the city will make available to vacation rental owners a copy of such document, you can put that on the website where they will have access to it, but it's not our job to be passing this out to you.
No, but it is our job to create this component for the website.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes, ma'am.
If you scroll down to line 434,
Yeah, that's where I am right now. It says
minimum
minimum.
vacation rental information, required postings or pamphlets.
Okay.
There
Would
you
you
go.
address that under that section 6?
Perfect.
See, that's where we talk about garbage pickup and there's
Right.
hospital,
And again-
all that's already right there.
And again, H is one more item that does not belong under
Okay.
what number 3 even says anyways.
Let's just take it out.
Okay.
Okay, so then,
So we may address it under section number 6, minimum information.
mhm.
Right.
Mandy, just because you added that to talk about under minimum information, number 6, can we also, I just don't want to forget by the time I get there, can we also look at A and B under, when we get to 6, can we propose looking at that?
Sure.
Thanks.
Right. So striking H.
We're We're striking everything under 3 and everything.
Three is
is that
gone.
correct?
Yeah, I'm just
Okay.
still making notes.
Right, I'm just confirming.
Remember this conversation.
Right, because we're going to move A, B, and H to a discussion under
You got it. Yeah,
minimum requirements.
agreed.
Okay.
Okay, so 3 is completely gone. Okay, so now we are back where I was. Okay, so it looks like the next thing is parking.
Mm-hmm. I'm fine with the way it was rewritten. Because that matches our city ordinance. You gotta be able to park in your driveway or on your premise, so you're not allowing on-street parking. And that's what this kind of says, to me, unless I'm reading it wrong.
Okay, what is a designated parking area?
So what this version doesn't show you, parking, this was stricken by planning. There was additional, originally, and if you recall, when we looked at that first section regarding registration, and there was that requirement regarding the visual depiction of the site, exterior-wise,
Right,
where
the
parking area
exterior,
was.
right.
That was tagged to that, so that's left over from that requirement, because under the original legislation, there was a parking restriction on the number of vehicles and some additional regulations on where individuals could park. And that was taken out. I know that was one of the really hot issues that was discussed at the planning stage.
I like the, in addition to what's there now, at one point there was consideration of adding prohibition of parking on streets and right-of-ways unless they're marked. Because right now, I think that we're really seeing a lot of parking problems throughout the city, people parking in right-of-ways, and we know that this is what's happening in our neighborhoods. So as we're trying to address what's happening in some of those areas, I think we have to be consistent. A business is a business, and if we're going to hold the downtown businesses responsible, I think it should be the same. And by adding this clarification, it may keep cars off the streets and right-of-ways.
The clarification, somehow that went in one ear and out the other, didn't, what clarification?
So the addition would be to consider adding to the current language in number 4 parking, add prohibition of parking on streets and right-of-ways unless they're marked.
Okay,
Because right now, in the neighborhoods, we just have people gumming up the streets and the right-of-ways where you're
I'm
not
with you.
supposed to park.
okay. The only other language I didn't really care for in number 4 was at the end where it says, abide by all generally applicable city of Dunnellon ordinances. Maybe we could take the language that you just used, put that in there, and then it would read, per city of Dunnellon ordinances.
I think you have it all if we just state that all vehicles associated with the vacation rental shall be parked within driveway or parking area located on the premises, because that, by its nature, takes everybody off the streets and so forth. It has to be on-site parking, period.
I just think when you come from out of town and I think people don't know how to define on-site parking, and when there's a little spot of grass along the street and it looks okay, that there's a lot of people parking in our right-of-ways. If that's just managed through reporting and calling the police, we can do that. I just think whatever we can do to make it clear here so that I, as a resident, don't have to be spending my weekends
No
policing
problem.
my neighbors, it's helpful for me.
I understand exactly where you're coming from, and that's, I think this is the planning commission language here. We can certainly change it to read something, all vehicles associated parked within a driveway or designated parking area located on the premises. May not be parked in the right-of-way, with an exception. There are certain areas that are marked for parking, or as a designated parking spot. Okay, so we add as an exception, then vehicles may be parked in city parking spaces, but under no circumstances in the right-of-way or an area that's not
Correct.
suitable for parking.
areas. Yeah.
Got it.
Does, we have this exterior site sketch, and in there, it talks about the number of parking places provided. Is G still out there, or did we take that out?
She is still out there.
Okay, so we have the sketch where they can park, and we tell them to park in designated areas, that ought to tie that together. And again, I do agree with you, that they'll park on the street, on the grass, and wherever, but I like the way you changed it.
Yeah, and I do think it's perfect that the sketch can tie into show me where your parking spots are.
Right. Okay,
I'm good.
I'm good with that. Good. You okay, Jen? You
Off
with that?
right of way.
Okay,
Right away.
all right.
Got it.
Do you all mind if I stepped out to my vehicle to get a,
No, have at it, Jan.
coat? And
No,
keep our
I-
house 80 degrees.
I got to step out in about 15 minutes, so you go ahead. We'll rotate. All right, now we're down to vacation rental responsible party, number 5. Oh, we changed, well, zoning changed number B to within 2 hours to just say reasonable time. I'd rather be defined. Actually, some of the ordinances, most of the ordinances I read, trying to get ready for this, do say about 2 hours. I saw one that actually said an hour, which that might be a little unreasonable. But what do y'all think about just reasonable time versus stating a time?
I'm sorry, Mayor, which section are we looking at?
I was looking at 5B.
I'm okay with the time, with the 2 hours that you're mentioning. What I have a question on is what determines required?
What was required?
What determines required?
Oh,
Just because I call up and complain about whatever, is that a requirement?
right.
Um,
So you want to define required? That's going me and you.
I know, I hear you, right. We'll all have a different perspective on
Well, I
requirements.
agree. I see what you're saying. I mean,
how can you narrowly redefine that?
So you're saying if it's like a neighbor complaint versus the police have shown up versus,
Right, right. If I just wake up sensitive that morning, I'm out there feeding the fish and got a squawking little child next door, you know, I'm just in a bad mood that day, I call up and now somebody's required to come out there, does that be required?
I would assume that means that you talked to the responsible party and you two agreed that it was required that somebody do so. Wouldn't you? Or
But who has the authority to require it?
Right.
I'd like to interject on that. I do have a little bit of experience in this, being a lieutenant with fire rescue, and we would have to call people or when they had fires or something going on at their house. And it may be important to you, but in their world, it was like, well, I'll get there when I get there. No, you have to get here. And what they don't realize is that when they're saying a reasonable time and there's no impetus, if we have something where a fire rescue or a police unit is there, that's going to tie up our police or fire unit
until you get there.
until you get there. Or we have to find somebody because you can't leave an unsecured scene.
Right.
So maybe the 2 hours to say you have to be here.
No, that's right. I think we need a number.
Yeah.
1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hours, we need a number.
Because it does tie up our resources.
Right, so should we change if required by emergency services?
Right.
Because,
Because believe me, one thing I learned is you look at something and it's an emergency, and in their world, it's like
sure,
planning.
So maybe that's what we change it, if required by emergency service, fire, police, whatever.
okay. Because just above that in A, we already have somebody being available 7 days a week, 24 hours a day to handle operating issues.
Right.
One way to handle it may just be simply to delete if required, and just say they're willing and able to come to the vacation rental, because the whole idea is to have someone who's available, just, you know, to be available to address these sort of things. It is difficult to, and, you know, it's difficult to, by law, require someone to come to a place. And so there are some limitations. I mean, I don't think there's a problem with this language, because it's clear, you know, what the intent of it is, but I don't think there's a way to make someone come from point A to point B. That's why we have the willing and able language. And so if the required is causing some confusion, we could just take out the be willing and able. Or pardon me, we could take out the if required.
Correct.
And it's just clear that it's a mandate that somebody needs to be available. And if somebody is not available, then there's a violation.
Okay. I get it.
makes sense.
And was 2 hours, or I guess you all haven't discussed the time frame yet.
We don't want 2 hours? 2 hours, yeah.
I'm good with that.
Okay.
Only the future will tell if it's,
Do what?
only the future's going to tell. I mean, if we have an emergency, we need them there sooner than 2 hours, but I don't know what to do with it, actually. Jan, do you have thoughts? You're all crinkled up.
Yeah, I just think that that's not reality. If somebody could be in another country, another state, they could be in Canada, whatever, for them to be required to respond,
Or
It doesn't have to be the owner, though.
it's got to be an agent or
or
something.
an agent or responsible party, then we should have something added to that when they register, they must give the name of the quote agent or responsible party.
That is in the ordinance.
Right, and that's in there.
We'll see, that's what
Right.
Yes.
A is
Okay.
responsible for.
See, I brought up from my time in fire rescue, I think you were out, is that
Oh, I agree, you know,
Is it-
somebody has to respond.
Right,
some-
right. It
we
doesn't have to be the
leave
owner.
the scene in somebody's care, or we have to provide the service.
Right.
So otherwise, somebody says, well, I'll be there in 4 hours. are we gonna send a Dunnellon, are we gonna keep a Dunnellon police officer on the scene for 4 hours? So, but what we would do, we had a list of vendors that if we had to do something, we could call those vendors up and we told them, well, since you can't be here, we are going to call these people and you're gonna be responsible for the building. Okay, so are we pretty much agreed, or?
I think so.
Yeah.
We're going to take out the words if required.
Take out the words within a reasonable time and add 2 hours?
2 hours.
No, we're going
What, 2 hours?
Yeah.
Within 2 hours instead of a reasonable time.
Right. Again, that's the responsible party. That doesn't have to be the owner, because I know when I check this list of all these short-term rentals, I mean, some of these people live in Colorado and California.
Exactly.
They can't show up, but their responsible party will show up.
But they all have agents and people
Right,
who manage the property.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. We're good with B, so now we're C.
Mm-hmm.
C is just a standard, 3-year requirement is under federal law, you have to keep your records for 3 years.
What's driving this? What's driving the 3 years, what's driving to maintain the records? We covered that earlier.
That's a state requirement that they maintain the records.
For 2 years, some communities have gone a little bit above and beyond it. So I think that if you're comfortable with state regulations, this part, we could take this out because that is covered by state law. Now, this is not a state requirement, what's written here, it goes above and beyond, but if we're looking at a situation where you're not going to be looking at the rental agreements and so forth, then I think the state record keeping probably will be sufficient for your purposes. And if you need to get an administrative search warrant or something to review those or have someone produce them, then you can get them that way.
Okay. We'll take it out.
We're removing C, correct?
Yes.
Polly, I hate to do it, but before we go on too long, I want to go back real quick to B and ask logistically how people will be directed to the responsible party. Do you all know, is that somewhere else in here? It's the responsible party, is that listed in?
I thought it was listed in the registration requirements.
It will need to be. In fact, I think now, since we're seeing how this ordinance is moving around, I would probably cut this and cut and paste it and remove it and place it back in the registration. Or I think the way that it's listed, there are some other substantive, it basically becomes an organization issue.
Okay.
And I will definitely include that, it's in there now, but I will include the responsible party as somebody that needs to be part of the forms that are filled out with the city.
Okay,
And certainly will be on the form when the city produces the form.
thanks.
And I'm pretty sure, I'm not sure with Marion County Fire Rescue, but I know when we had fire department, and I believe the police department does it now, they maintain contact information and phone numbers for all the businesses in town in case there's a break-in or an emergency. So when they would register, that information would be passed along to, at a minimum, our police department, and maybe even Marion County Fire Rescue if they want to do that. So if something were to happen, they would have the contact information if it's midnight and
Right.
they need to reach somebody because the house is on fire, or somebody broke into it or something. So we could share that with them to make sure they had that contact information.
Okay. You're going to capture that somewhere, so don't forget it.
It would just be through our administrative process. We would put a little CC at the bottom of the form or the application, make sure we share it.
Okay.
Thanks. That brings us to D.
Which is now C.
And the problem I have with D is, can that really be held up if there's a legal notice and we send it to the agent and not the owner?
Yes, because in this case, you're talking about receiving service for any violation, something along those lines. It's essentially saying that that person is a go-to, point, and that they have to be able to pass that on. So the whole idea is to facilitate that chain of communication so that when a code enforcement officer, police officer is talking to somebody, everybody's not shrugging their shoulders and saying, hey, I don't know who to talk to. It's just simply saying, hey, you're the guy, you need to go tell the owner what to do and how to fix this.
Gotcha, perfect. And based on the other conversations we've had around, are we done with D? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I am. I think E ought to be struck,
That's where I'm at too. I'll just,
because we just struck it from the other.
right.
If state law requires it, then
Yeah,
Put
or
it in here.
statute 509, 101.
just forget it. We all good with that?
Yeah, I'm good with F.
Okay. That was reasonable. Or set forth in this one.
This is the section where we talked about just a moment ago, addressing
Right.
code and garbage pickup, feeding alligators and that sort of thing.
Occupants.
Council, if I can, one of the things I would tell you here, again, we have this regulation that places regulations in certain ways on the homeowner, and of course on visitors too. And some of these things the city has control over, some that it doesn't. Now, it can mandate that certain information be disseminated, but there's really not a way to go back and see what was disseminated. If the city is creating the pamphlets or putting something on the website, the city has complete control over that. So what I do see, I think, in the communities that have regulated best, they do have a comprehensive, and by comprehensive, I'm not talking about pages and pages, but something on their webpage that says, hey, this is what you guys have to follow. Some sort of a checklist. I know we've seen some checklists coming through. Something that's saying, hey, you have to follow this, and here's some information that'll help you along the way. So certainly, some vacation, people who go on vacation may not check that city website, but at least if it's there, the city has complete control over it. Because at the end of the day, even if we're requiring, or the city is requiring, certain things be posted on the fridge and so forth, it may or may not be. It depends on how responsible the homeowner is. And no matter what level of inspection was mandated or even was legal, I mean, unless someone's going there and checking every day, there's no way to make sure. The city website is the city website, and the information will always be made available. And within the ordinance, if there's a mandate, hey, you need to, produce this or make sure that somebody can get to this, and there's a direct line. At least that way, the city has complete control over it. So one of the things that I would suggest is just keeping that in mind when going through here, and just looking at it from the standpoint of what does the city want to put out there? Because ultimately, that's what we can control, 100%.
Gotcha.
So would that be where we would put in something about the alligators, and since most of the people were going to be, or, do not feed the wildlife?
What I think, you could have some parity here. These were not particularly As I understand it, these were not controversial passages. Certainly, all the stuff can go on the city's website, but you could mandate that, it's handed out too, or produced in a pamphlet. If the city creates a pamphlet and says, hey, please hand these out, or hey, you have to have these on site, yeah, you may not have an inspection to go verify that, but at least the pamphlet's been produced by the city, they have a copy, and at a minimum, there's some direction that points individuals to the city website. So I think if the city doesn't take control over the information that's going to be produced, you're just not going to get effective information passed down. So I don't have any issue with this, the way that it's written or the way that the Planning Commission suggested that it be modified as is. I just think that the big check will be, and what will be most effective is what's on the city's website. And so anything that is included in here, should be on the city's website too, including the river information and so forth. But it can be required here as well, as for parity.
Maybe another good thing that should be in there would be suggested evacuation locations for hurricanes. Since people coming from out of town will have no idea if they're here. Whereas we all know to get water, we get food, you're probably going to be without power.
That is a current requirement. It does require a basic evacuation map, and that
Right.
could go on the city's website.
For the locality, yeah.
Mhm.
So,
I see what you mean. It's been modified so that it's unit-specific,
Right.
but we want an evacuation map from the city.
But isn't the evacuation going to be determined by the storm and by the authorities based on what direction?
That is true, too.
It does seem a bit of a stretch to me that we're going to get into evacuation routes out of the city.
Because that's going to be determined at the time of the storm.
Right, we could have a natural disaster that does close a certain route that would be a normally evacuation type road.
Not our specialty.
now, in another section, didn't we remove, or was it removed, the maximum number of vehicles? So in F, is there a maximum number of vehicles still identified in the ordinance?
I don't,
I know at one point it was 5,
there's 5, yes.
and that was removed. So there's not a maximum number of vehicles in the parking section, line 386, where that starts. So I don't know that you need to say the maximum number of vehicles that can be parked on site.
But we also talked about the exterior site sketch showing where the parking places are. And we know there's a lot of variability with different homes and sizes.
Right, I'm not saying to take that out completely, but just the location of designated parking spaces. And
Oh, that the first part's okay,
You
but
can
get
take
rid
it
of
First
out.
part's okay, but then if applicable, the maximum number of vehicles.
fine.
Because there's no maximum anymore, if you leave it as it is.
It's just
now.
what fits.
Yeah.
Right.
And so when you talk about if the city is going to be responsible for publishing some sort of required posting or pamphlet, we need, at least I need some direction on that and how that's going to look, what information it's going to contain. Now, we would not be able to finalize something like that if all of these requirements, because we're not going to be able to pre-prepare something that has the parking spaces, has the responsible party, has the evacuation map. Are we going to be tasked with providing an evacuation map for each short-term rental?
No, I see
No.
what you're saying.
Okay, so, but I'm just saying, because a lot of this is coming into taking this information and putting it on
Website,
us to provide,
right.
but we won't be able to provide all of that in a standard format, because we won't have that information until we get the application.
Right, so we're gonna have to remove some of these, like, you know, A, B, all of these are very specific to the unit itself. And if the short-term rental owner isn't gonna do that themselves, certainly the city's not gonna do it. So we have to decide, right, if we wanna require it of them to have it posted on site. And
But
then,
I think number 6, it doesn't say anything about us doing it. It says a vacation rental shall be posted or pamphlets provided to the occupants. I don't see anything in there that says that we have to do that.
right, but I think the discussion is there a benefit to the city producing a document that has general information, not specific to that short-term rental, but
I
general things about alligators and trash pickup in hospitals? Is that something that should be generated by the city, and how should we manage the other points which are more individual to the
Okay.
unit? Is that,
We need to clearly identify what the owner is going to be required to provide and what the city is going to provide.
Correct. We got a mixed bag in. We got 2 separate categories, and we've got a combination of each mixed out throughout here.
And what you can't see, because I'm looking at the, council, I'm looking at a version here with some of the strike through. Originally, it was laid out just that way in the original ordinance as to what the homeowner or vacation rental owner needs to provide, or designated party. But then also a copy of the latest version of the document referenced within subsection, that other portion of the code, and that subsection has changed, so I won't read that part. Herein, document to be supplied from the city, which includes excerpts from City of Dunnellon ordinances of general application to vacation rentals. So in essence, that is your rules of, you know, regarding wildlife, regarding noise ordinances, regarding trash pickup and so forth, which can be a general pamphlet and information on the website. It just, this is apparently, I see it here, it's just morphed a bit over time with some edits, but the original version encapsulates that, and I can keep those separate in the rewrite, no problem.
Yeah, I'm like you, I think we need to break them apart. So, you know, the city will provide what it needs to, like evacuation routes and things like that, but some of this other stuff, the owner's gonna have to do.
Yes.
could it be made into like a worksheet where it's online and the city posts the very general information, and then we leave spaces for like name and address of the responsible party, the maximum occupancy, the areas of parking, and then the city could list the hospital, and then it could be a resource for the short-term rental owner, print it off, they could plug in those very specific areas and use the worksheet.
That's fine.
I don't know if it's realistic.
I think it would work well, because if the city goes through and I'm not, the way I see it and the way it was previously written, it's not a complicated, it doesn't have to be a complicated document. If you just have simply your basic applicable ordinances and then have in, you know, 5 lines of site-specific information, I think that's I don't want to speak for staff, but it does seem like a fairly, once the document's created, a fairly easy document to produce and work with. I mean, talking about like a 3-page trifold
And it's
thing or
just
something like that, or.
The owner fills in the blanks.
Yeah, and this is a pain point I heard from a vacation rental owner who said, I'm gonna have to tell them about the trash and the alligators and how many people can stay here. And so this would really condense it right down into a very simple worksheet. They could enter a little bit of information, and it could be like a brochure. Then nobody would have to tell anybody anything. It could sort of sit on the table.
Everybody would be consistent that way also.
Yeah,
Right.
real simple.
And anything that we don't know at the time of their application or the issuance of their
Well, it'll be fill in the blank by the owner.
registration, like the evacuation map, we could just put to be attached by property owner. Now, we can list these things, but if we don't have it, to be attached by property owner, something like
Right,
that.
right, or we just have a whole section to be filled out by property owner, and then that way, they don't have to figure it out. They can just go in to fill out the blank, like Julianne said, print it.
I think with the idea would be that we would just trust that they would do it as opposed to
Yes,
having to see it as
Right.
part of the packet.
Yeah, that's definitely something we can do.
That way, if anything goes wrong, it was a requirement that we expected, and if it wasn't done, it's really on the onus of the business owner.
So now do we want to go through and agree with what's going to be on there? Starting with A?
Andrew, what is this C3H referring to? I'm confused. Copy of the latest version of the document referenced within subsection C3H, the document to be supplied by the city.
Yeah, this goes back to line 3, sorry,
Subsection 3BH.
line 363.
363.
Those are the alligators and city regulations. So city regulations regarding solid waste pickup, state laws regarding wildlife, and noise ordinances.
Okay, so there was something already identified in that section that the city was already going to be responsible for.
Yeah, when we
Right, that's
omitted
H, that's that whole, sorry, Julian.
No,
Yeah, that's that whole big, huge paragraph about a copy of the document to be supplied by the city, which includes excerpts, blah, 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 and it'll be in digital format.
That was struck.
That we struck.
and we decided to move it over A, B, and H, we were going to move over to this section.
Mhm.
And I already see that some of them are already there.
So 3CH has to be removed because that doesn't exist anymore.
I thought,
We're going to move it over to this number 6 section, and we're going to make that part of our pamphlet.
Okay, but C3H has got to be stricken.
correct.
Okay. Whew.
We're almost there.
Nothing to it, Mandy.
So we're going to replace H with C3H? Is that what we're doing?
See,
Just moving it, because before it was a reference to that section,
Now
so it
we
didn't have to be
said move.
restated twice, but that has been deleted from the previous section, it's just going to be moved over here.
Okay. So this H is going to go away, and we're going to
Correct.
replace it with some version of C3H that was deleted. Okay.
And I think as we go through section 6, it's going to become
correct, right.
All right, so I think in
Exactly.
section 6, we're talking about the minimum vacation rental information, required postings or pamphlets. And I think A and B need to be on the pamphlet, right? Responsible party, maximum occupancy.
Mhm.
How about the trash,
Um,
how about the trash days?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think so.
We actually have a pamphlet that's already been created for everyone that outlines everything about our waste management schedules and
Right,
provisions and
right.
everything.
We can take that and just shove it in here so that the people that stay at the homes, at the rentals can see it right away.
So that'll take care of C and D, using part of that resource, right?
Yes. Now, with C, before we move on with C, I don't believe we recycle anymore.
We don't.
So then D and E, trash pickup, it's redundant, location of the nearest hospital will be in there, right?
And couldn't we combine C and D? Sure. Just a notification that all garbage or trash must be placed in
Oh,
garbage
absolutely.
or trash can, receptacle, and the days of time and trash pickup?
Yes.
And then somewhere, you'll grab the information and put the days, the actual days in there, Mandy?
Oh, yeah.
And in C here,
Sir?
it'll actually be put in C.
Oh, Oh, you want us to put it in the ordinance? We'll put it in the information that we disseminate, but not the days and times. of the
Oh, I'm sorry.
ordinance.
Yes, ma'am,
That
yes,
can
ma'am.
change.
Yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am. That's why you're the boss.
That's what keeps things straight.
So we're moving on to F, right?
Correct.
And Mandy cleaned that one up already.
Mhm. Right.
We're good with G?
I'm good with G.
The owner will provide that? That's on the worksheet. Think we made it through 6?
Unless somebody can think of anything we need to add,
I'm good.
I'm good. I
Oh,
can,
are we going to have noise ordinance and pet ordinance rules in there?
Well, we're gonna replace H with some version of C3H that was deleted that includes all that information.
Perfect, thank you.
so where would that go?
We would remove H here
Correct?
and take a version, maybe condensed, of C3H, which was deleted from the prior section, and put it here, stating that in the information about our noise ordinance, wildlife, and all that would be included.
Gotcha.
That's
So
okay.
C3H did not actually go away, it's actually just being
Just
moved
been
here.
moved,
to-
Right, I'm
But
with you.
maybe just reworded a little
Got
bit.
it. Cool, thank you.
So we're moving on to the additional use restrictions.
That's where that comes back up. Okay.
I'm fine with that. Y'all see anything you want to change?
Well, there was a lot of controversy about this
What's that?
commercial use statement earlier, right?
I don't know about controversy, maybe confusion.
Okay, confusion. That
On my part anyways.
Sure, didn't it ultimately end in the elimination of it earlier?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I still have some feelings about it, but I know that there was a consensus at it on line 361. I felt like after the full discussion that the consensus was that it
We're
should
taking
be.
B out.
Well, I think there's a difference in that, as Andrew pointed out, the previous section where you took it out was commercial use would be prohibited anyway and handled through our code enforcement zoning code, where this is you're instructing the rental owner not to advertise it as a commercial use. So there's a little bit of a difference there. So we're here, you're saying, short-term rental owner, do not advertise your property as a commercial use.
Commercial item.
That was my point earlier. I just made my point too early. But here it is. It's back. I think we should keep it.
You were ahead of
Okay.
yourself.
I was reading and I wasn't paying attention.
It's a lot to follow.
So what we're saying is this is a restriction for them not advertising it as a commercial venue.
Right.
Gosh, I'm having a deja vu.
I'm not seeing that, Wally. Vacation rental shall not be used, or advertised. All I had to do is keep reading. Okay,
Yeah, line 435, if you're looking at the
Right.
marked up.
I'm good now.
Use the word advertise as commercial. Okay.
On D, a vacation rental shall include rental. We're asking that they include the registration number of the vacation rental. Is that legal?
It is currently, I will tell you, when you're doing direct advertising, though, you are constraining speech. I mean, you're regulating speech. And I think that's why the legislature, of course, they haven't yet, has taken a lot of interest in regulating, and it looks like they're going to be preempting and handling, the advertising. So that's one of the things that they would presumably be requiring, because otherwise, how do you check that it is?
Yeah, no, I understand, right, that part. Just not sure what the legalities fall.
With advertising and some of the requirements here, I mean, at the end of the day, what the real problem is not the advertising, it is what's going on site. And further you get away from regulating speech, you have certain time, place, manner restrictions, that's all okay, and it's upheld. But if you don't need to, it's better not to, if that makes sense. This can stay in, and I could try to marry the other section with it, or we could talk a little bit about it later, or we could strike it. It doesn't bother me too much, because you all are aware of what's being advertised, and if the advertisements come out and there's a problem, with a certain advertisement, that's going to tip off, inspectors and the city and so forth to take enforcement action. So, really going beyond and regulating advertising, to a certain point, I don't, it just depends on kind of what you all want to do. I don't see it currently being illegal, it's just, I do expect it to be preempted to the state, but I haven't done it yet.
Okay.
I feel like what you just presented is a little bit like reactive, whereas we want to be proactive with how it's being advertised, right? So you said if there's an advertisement and it's off, it's going to, put off some alarm bells. But aren't we trying to assure from the front end that it's advertised so that we don't have to maybe
Go back in and take the action
Yeah.
later?
Yeah, by making the expectations clear from the start.
I guess I'm confused. What is the benefit to them using that registration number in their advertisement?
It identifies the specific unit to the city, so the city would know who's advertising, which, so in other words, if they're issued a registration number, they have to include the registration number, and they're advertising, hey, we have room for 16 individuals, but the house only supports 4, it makes it easy for the city, or if somebody's witnessing illegal activity, to report it and say, hey, look at this advertisement, then the number's right there.
Gotcha.
Yeah, if it falls in line with the law, I'm good with it.
Me too. You good with that, Wally?
I'm good with it.
We're good on that end? Okay, I wanted to step back to see. This was one that I had gotten some feedback from the public on. Vacation rentals and their occupants must comply. This is a bit of a catch-all for federal, state, and county laws, ordinance, regulations, administrative codes, some of which we've listed in here. For me, it's kind of nice and neat because it captures a lot of different areas that the business owner needs to pay attention to. So I just want to see if there's any feedback on C and if we're in agreement to leave it as is or if there's proposed changes.
I say leave it as it is. I think that
Yeah.
these are all laws and ordinances that are put out, and we're just saying you have to follow them.
Yeah.
One thing that the council could do that accomplishes it without, and I think it addresses some of the complaints, without, what essentially this catch-all provision does is makes it a city violation if one of these other state violations and so forth are, if one of those, if there's a violation on that level. The catch-all is helpful, but because we are seeing a situation where preemption may come into play, I think one alternative is just, as part of the registration, to put that on the form, and the vacation rental owner signs it, and they're aware that, hey, I have to comply with all these. So if they break a state law, it doesn't become the city's ability to enforce that broken state law. I mean, it wouldn't be, it would be enforcing its code, you see what I'm saying? But it's not like you broke the city's ordinance and the state law, you just broke the state law. The city becomes aware of it, they make a report, and ultimately what would happen in that case would go to DBPR, and the DBPR would call the local police and say, you deal with it. So it comes back to the city anyhow. But it takes out that, I think that heartburn that I was hearing, listening to some of the meetings, that, well, is the city trying to essentially wiggle away into enforcing state law? Because that wasn't the intent. But it still essentially puts the homeowner, the vacation rental owner on notice. These are the things that you have to follow. And we know we're going to see some of that on the website too. So I think that's probably a really, streamlined way of handling it, if council's okay with that, of accomplishing the same thing without maybe encountering some of the heartburn from the comments that some of you all have received.
So, Andrew, you're suggesting take this out and add it to the application?
I would rewrite it slightly, so it's essentially written as information that they sign off. Oftentimes you'll see in these regulations, that they have to sign an affidavit. We require, or the city currently under this draft requires a notarized document. This would just be something in there saying that homeowners are aware that you do need to comply with all these and it is your full intent to not break the law.
But we're taking it out here.
Take it out here and essentially I'll keep it, but move it and rework it a bit. Move it to the front of the ordinance into that first section regarding applications.
Okay, so it's still going to appear in the ordinance, it's just going to appear in a different place. Okay.
We're leaving it both places?
No.
We're taking it out of the ordinance?
It's going to become something more that when they're filling out an application form, it's going to be information. Like they have to sign off that they're aware that they still have to follow federal and state regulations and so
Right,
forth.
I
And they're going to get in
understand
trouble
that.
if they don't.
Right.
So it would move from here and I would just move it to the front and it would be part of that redraft that we'd be working on. So it would come out of here, yes.
Come out of the ordinance?
This whole section here, this crossed out C, yes, this would be completely deleted,
Okay.
and I would rework the language so that it becomes part of the application process. It won't state that they have to comply with all applicable regulations and standards. It's going to state that they have to state that they're aware that they have to comply with all of these. So in other words, what I'm saying is, under this version here, what I was explaining, the way it's written currently, if you violate a state law or a federal law, you're also violating the ordinance because of this catch-all provision. It ceases to become a catch-all provision and now becomes informational, telling the short-term rental owner, manager, whoever it may be, how to comply and what rules they should comply with.
Okay.
Andrew, can you just give me a brief help on understanding the benefits of taking it out of the ordinance altogether? I understand where you're going to put it and what the function is going to be, What's the benefit of taking it out altogether?
The benefit of it is if there are, we're stating it's very broad, all applicable federal, state, county laws and so forth. There are a number of areas where, and I've seen this provision over and over. As we've gone through this and as we've gone through all these meetings, I found certain sections and so forth which are preempted to federal regulations, certain things that are preempted to state regulation. And I don't think that it would necessarily come up the way that these are buried, but I think that by keeping it in, there could be certain issues with preemption with the catch-all where if there is something that is preempted and it's stating you have to comply with that, ultimately it's not the city's responsibility to garner compliance. And we don't want to be in a situation that the city is saying, well, now you're in a violation of our ordinance, but we're preempted from actually enforcing it. So it creates an issue. It could be severable and struck from the ordinance if it were ever to be challenged, but I think that it provides and puts the city in a better, by removing it, it puts the city in a better position of letting folks know you have to comply with all this stuff, but not making it a violation where we don't step into preempted territory by any means, if that makes sense.
Thank you. So am I hearing some consensus on taking it out and moving it into a statement for the registration?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
And advertising, there were no changes to that, correct? D, no changes there.
Correct.
Now E.
So number one, sexual offender proximity and prohibitions. This was a big pain point with short-term rental owners. Maybe we could look at removing it, since this is something that will apply citywide, and we could put it on our wish list to pass a city ordinance that addresses sexual offender proximity. Does anyone have any other thoughts on that?
I'm fine with that, because then it would comply with, our city laws, our city ordinances. So it wouldn't isolate, short-term rental people. It applies to every homeowner. Right?
Yeah, and the version that we're looking at up here has been watered down from the original version.
Right.
Yeah, you all know.
Yeah, the original version was,
Right, it had
Wow.
training, it had
yeah, a bit different.
short-term rental owners are supposed to figure out who was who, stuff that just wasn't.
Yeah, and the
Wasn't
argument about treating the businesses as we're treating the city, I really struggle with that when I hear it because, we do have the ability to do different things with residents versus businesses.
Right.
But but I agree at the end of the day.
And I guess with the version that's in here now, what is the way the language has been, with knowingly, willfully, knowingly, or negligent. Is there a reason to take it out the way it's worded now?
Well, I think, what
I also don't see what it's going to do if it's left in, I guess, either, so.
the city explored having a sexual offense ordinance and a proximity distance regulation, Mandy, I don't know, was it maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and ultimately decided not to after Chief McQuaig stated that there were only X number of registered sexual offenders that lived in the city. It was something that was definitely a topic of discussion. The council decided not to. This is an area that we see in some of these ordinances, especially in South Florida, where human trafficking and sexual offenders it's an awful problem everywhere, but we certainly see the numbers much higher down in South Florida. And that's where we see a lot of these, coming from. So it's an option. But reason to take it out, why not make it applicable for all rentals and all residences and so forth? You know, if the city's changing direction and really wants to make that a priority, it's very easy to encapsulate it, and it applies to every residential property within the city, and you can provide, mimic the state distance requirements, for schools and other places where children congregate. Now, what I will tell you is, and I have one city in particular where it's been very effective, playgrounds and other areas. There's a proximity distance regulation, an ordinance I did based off of Lake County's ordinance for a particular municipality, and they have kept probably about 10 different offenders away from certain communities that have playgrounds and so forth based on that regulation. So it can be very effective if it's used, in a manner that is broad. Here, I think, while it does have some value, if the thought is to make it citywide, there's really no reason to keep it in, and I have a plethora of ordinances to pull from to put something together for you very quickly that would work very well for the entire community. You would just have to decide on distances and.
Sure. Yeah, and when you just mentioned distances, I just realized we do have a 2,500-foot distance in here specifically, so that goes beyond what I was, okay. So I'm good with removing it.
And we'll address it from a citywide ordinance. I agree. I'm good with that. You good with that? You good with that?
Yeah.
Taking this one out? Okay.
And I know that we have workshop agendas, full for the next forever, but I would hope that it could stay on our radar, because like you just said, I think it's a pretty quick and easy thing. And
But it's
super
not
important.
just important to short-term rental.
Right.
Right. So I just
agree.
want to make sure it shows up again soon so that we don't miss an opportunity to get it done.
What I can do, because it's part of this project, right? I mean, it was in the original ordinance. If council would like, two different things I can do. I can provide you with a sample of the legislation, perhaps the ordinance that I'm just referring to, that you can take a look at. And when I go back and revise this, so you'll get this and that, just to take a look at, or we could adopt that. That's probably the best way, so you can see what we're talking about. Or I could send it to Mandy tomorrow and it can go out. And, it does not take long to put together a sexual offender ordinance. I've done a ton of them.
Okay.
And so, really, yeah, tomorrow I could send you a sample, and then we can see from there. And if you like something like that, I can put something together for you.
Okay.
And really, they could be considered at the same time and adopted at the same time, if that's the
Okay.
case.
Gotcha. But that'd be totally separate than this.
It'd be totally
Cool.
separate, but I mean,
Just
the
wanna
work's
sure.
already done, and the
Gotcha.
research is already done. It's just a matter of, hey, does this work for you? And maybe make a tweak
Right.
here or two and redo the whereas clauses for Dunnellon.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. You good with that? Okay, human trafficking.
That would be part of the sexual offender ordinance.
I was gonna say, and that's part of the same thing.
Right, yeah,
Okay,
so-
so we'll pull it out here and again, do it in a separate ordinance.
The entirety of E is going to disappear, is that what we're saying?
Well, there's human trafficking, isn't there, I know there's a lot of controversy about this requirement of training and who's really the front-facing people and the housekeepers, and it's not traditional in this sense, but is it possible or practical to just include whatever the state requirement is as it relates to human trafficking in the business of short-term rentals? Because that is, there is state requirements connected to this, are there not?
There is a education requirement, and certainly I could refer to that in the whereas clauses, as well as it could be part of the information that is passed on, that, human trafficking information, and that short-term rentals are responsible under 509 to get the proper training.
Yeah, I think it's like a couple dollars, it's online, it takes a couple minutes, I think it's responsible. So I would like to see it included somewhere. But council can weigh in and,
Fine with that?
Yeah, actually, I have first-hand information with the training. The one that's next door to me, the manager of that building, her computer wasn't working, and so she came over to our house, and we downloaded the program, and actually went through the training with her. And so it was not, yeah, like you said, it was only a couple bucks. It was not hard to get at. It was not hard to go through, test, or anything. I'm not sure how applicable that it would really be towards the cause. And that was my viewpoint when I got done with the training. It learned some interesting things. $8 billion business worldwide. Right, and, but, again, I'm not sure it really, at the end of the day, it really is going to bear any fruit. That's my own personal experience with it.
I think one of the things that we can do is, you know, if we're going to be doing a sexual offender ordinance in tangent with this ordinance, that human trafficking will be part of that. And in the whereas clause is definitely making a reference to the city's commitment to human trafficking and stating that there are requirements and so forth in the state. And also in that information section when it comes to trash and garbage and so forth, just reminding folks that, you know, the city does have a sexual offender and trafficking ordinance, be aware of it, and you're going to get in trouble if you don't want, you know, make sure that that's not going on.
Right.
That it is illegal for, you know, rental places to have those kind of operations going on. So I think that between those, it's really hitting it in three different directions. In the whereas clauses itself, which may be a good idea to codify, having it within the body of the ordinance and referencing the education, and then it'll be blatant, you know, crystal clear, of course, in the sexual offender ordinance that's a standalone ordinance that applies to every residential property in the city.
Gotcha. I'm not sure where we left with that one as far as in or out. And be pretty frank, it was not cumbersome, took 2 hours, less than 2 hours to do. I could go either way on it. If
It is
somebody
a
is,
requirement, and I feel like Andrew can integrate it in some creative places.
Human trafficking is pretty near and dear to me, so I have no problem making sure that it goes in there.
okay.
We can agree on that?
I'm
Okay.
good with that. So is it out of the ordinance or in the ordinance?
It'll be referenced within, it will not be a requirement per se here because it's going to be addressed in a separate ordinance,
Gotcha.
but there will be references in two different places within this ordinance to
that's
human
what I
trafficking to
thought.
show that it's a priority of the city and to remind folks that who own these type of properties that they have a requirement that they need to comply with.
Okay, thank you.
Council, I'll tell you, the remainder of the ordinance here, these are all terms that legally have to be in here.
I was just saying, I'm reading them again, and that seems pretty straightforward. I guess the one thing that I find that we've still got to address, and I agree what you just said, the rest of this is, for lack of a better term, legal boilerplate, but I think the thing that probably a lot of folks are interested in is how soon would we be able to apply something like this? And I think we have to be reasonable when we get the ordinance done, is how soon would we require short-term rental owners to try to comply with this? Clearly, any lease that they've signed before this is passed is not subject to this, okay? And I guess I should bring that down. But, you know, we've still got to come up with forms. We've still got a lot of things to do. So let's just pick a day. Say we pass this on Thanksgiving Day. All right. How soon after that would it be reasonable to get all the rest of this stuff done and make it a requirement of, and where this is going was one case I know I read that they basically passed something and then they waited about 6 months to have it take effect. And in that 6 months, they worked out a lot of the details. I'm not saying we need 6 months. I'm just saying that was one of the cases I saw. And actually, when it was passed, there was some legal action taken. But by the time it got around to the 6 months, the legal matters have all been settled. So,
Yeah, I think, you know, one of the city's goals should be to adopt the ordinance by October 1st. Given the deadline there, just to keep it on track with the ordinance as it's developed and not have to add
Sure.
in new requirements.
I agree
And
with
finally,
that.
just to get it done. I know everybody's committed to that. And then the question, of course, is, yes, when does it become effective? 6 months sounds reasonable. In addition, if you're looking at October 1st, that puts January 1st, 5 months. So, kind of the dates that I look at when I draft this type of regulation, we usually like to tag it to, the October 1st fiscal year sort of, and that's when a lot of things are issued. And it's typically convenient for staff. January 1st also is a popular date, but of course that's a holiday. So I would say what I would recommend, since you're asking, is probably not before January 1st, definitely sometime in 2024. And then, it could be up to sometime between January 1st and March 1st seems to make the most sense, just offhand.
I would just like to ask for clarification, the line 475, the vesting section, that I hear you saying that we would be aiming to adopt this by October 1st, which sounds very good. Is it my understanding that then, we have a simple registration process for people to start coming in and at least getting started with some of the basic information, and at that point, the city would collect all existing contracts so that we can track sort of what agreements are out there and have this end date where it resets and the businesses are in compliance with our ordinance.
I should clarify, I'm speaking of an adoption date. So,
Oh.
my apologies. So October 1st would be the adoption date. The effective date, essentially when the ordinance becomes regulation, would be more so in January or in that January to March particular period. So that would be, though, the window where the city could essentially get everything put together and do their information campaign, letting folks know, hey, you have to come in and register. So, nothing would really happen until then. And I guess, yeah, with the vesting and so forth, if we're not collecting agreements and that type of thing, there may be a different way of doing that. I may have to come back and provide some options because you do have to have a vesting program. Given the changes in the ordinance, it may need to be reworked a little bit. So I'll probably have to do some homework on that and bring back some options because there will be a very, significant vesting section, but it's going to look different than it does now. So,
Okay, and just to be clear that
If I could ask my fellow council members that maybe we leave that for a discussion at a workshop, because I think we really need to confer with our administrative staff on what might work best for them, how they're going to designate duties amongst themselves and so on.
and coordinate with the fire department.
Great, yeah, I just have an interest
Police and
in,
fire department.
yeah, my interest is knowing when we'll be collecting the existing contracts so that we have an idea of things to run its course. But I agree with you, Jan, that is a very good idea.
To piggyback off of that, Jan, a few bullets that I have down here. To me, we just did the first part. We reviewed and we understand all the proposed regulations. The following bullets are, we need to understand the logistics of what the staff is going to do. We need to understand what tools are going to be required. We need to understand the roles and responsibilities and cost to implement and sustain the ordinance. Then, after we understand all that, we would set up the logistics and fee structure for the STR owners. I understand the part about getting what we're working on right now before it comes way too cumbersome and expensive by October 1. But as far as implementation, we have to do all this other stuff first before we're ready to implement. And I think right now, any kind of date that we try to choose, at least today, we're just guessing.
We would have to, in the final draft before first reading is when we would ultimately need a decision to be made to that 2024 date, whatever it is.
Okay.
No, we don't need it right now for me to continue the work based on the feedback that I've heard today. But if we're looking for October 1st, if we do 2 readings in September, we would just need to know sometime in August. Ultimately work out those dates. Doesn't mean everything else needs to be worked out, but have an idea of what costs and so forth are going to be passed on regarding registration. Most registration is just typically a fee for office staff to, handle the administrative portion of it, and then whatever the fire inspection costs.
There'll be workshops on this, yeah, I'll just wait to future workshops. When it comes to fees and all that, that all has to be discussed. I won't pick that scab now.
Okay.
So Andrew, would I be correct to assume that we would have to have a first reading of this at the next meeting in August, so the second reading, so we can vote on it in September to get it in by October?
No, not necessarily. You have, what it would probably take is, I think there are still some decisions to be made, and guessing the way that things are probably going to go, I would recommend in September doing first and second reading in September, so having a special meeting for second reading, just so it can go through all the processes and everything it needs to go through in August. So now kind of what needs to happen next, this needs to be redrafted and then disseminated to you all for your review. Presumably, we could either, look at it again at another workshop, and if that's all good, then at that point, it needs to go to planning at some point as well. And it may take 2 workshops, I don't know, ultimately, just depending on, how council feels about the ordinance. But what we do need to have happen before it's adopted, it has to go to planning, has to have first and second reading with you all. All of that can happen in September. The planning review only needs to be for comprehensive plan consistency, so they don't need to go through it line by line. Typically, planning happens before first reading. We have had situations in the past where council does the first reading and then sends it over to planning and goes to second. It kind of depends on the schedule and how you all want to go from there and how things like line up. And, if there needs to be a special planning commission meeting for that, that can happen too. So if we just, looking at a schedule, like I said, all that can happen in September. Nothing needs to happen in August except for council. I think by the end of August, my goal, if I were asking council for a goal, would be to really have an ordinance that is finalized the way that you like it, maybe subject to a tweak or two, as we go through first and second reading, but really an ordinance that's finalized by the end of August.
Sure.
There's a lot of ways to skin that, all up to you. That's what's ultimately required and what we have to do.
Okay. Sounds good.
Keep in mind too, we have 2 meetings in September because of budget hearings.
Budget
All right.
too. Okay.
So in September, we have, if we're not ready by the first.
Everybody will be meeting anyhow.
Yeah,
I would say we got budget meetings all in September, so.
right. But we have 2 official council meetings in September.
Right.
We don't normally have 2 official council meetings, but we have to pass the budget. And I would just bring one thing that it's just a question for me, playing devil's advocate here. Under the vesting section, it says existing legally established vacation rentals. So does that section only apply to those who are registered with the state already, or all vacation rental owners?
Well, it'll apply to, in order to have vesting and so forth, they have to be a legal operation. So remember that if this is adopted October 1st and it doesn't become effective until January, then really, in order for it to be subject to city prosecution if there's some sort of illegal activity, per the ordinance, a property owner is going to have that 6 months to go ahead and register with the state if they haven't done so already, and get everything taken care of. Because this ordinance is on the books, but it is not effective until that date.
Okay.
So the city's getting their ducks in a row. It's allowing a long period for short-term rental vacation owners to review everything, become aware of what they have to do, and start that process and secure things in the state. Meanwhile, yeah, if they, if it doesn't become effective until January and they have a booking in November, that would be vested. If in November prior to, let's say January 1st is the effective date.
Okay.
If, someone calls in November and says, hey, I want to book this for next March. If they've complied with all of that by the time it comes online, then that March, date would be vested. So my point is, after the ordinance is adopted, there's still that period before it becomes effective, where short-term rental owners will still be taking in clients for agreements that could be vested in the future.
I guess my question is, once the ordinance becomes effective, say it's effective January 1st, and are these vesting requirements going to be granted to people who are not registered with the state?
Well, no, because they would have to, they're operating illegally, per the state, they have to, and they wouldn't be able to be registered with the city until they have a state registration.
Okay.
So this is only dealing with, the individuals who have gone and gotten the state registration, because otherwise, their operation is a misdemeanor, they can go to jail for it.
Okay.
Not under the city's law, but under the state law.
Yeah, okay. I'm just trying to make sure I understand how this is all going to work once it becomes effective, but I guess I got at least 6 months to figure it out.
Yeah. It's not gonna happen tomorrow. But, and again, we've got to get, the city's got a lot of things they're gonna have to do, and the short-term rental owners have got things they gotta get done before it goes effective. So, it's gonna take some time. All right,
I think, Mandy, and we can chat about it, too, it really takes care of itself, because vesting only really becomes an issue if the person is really ceasing operation of the short-term rental. Because otherwise, they're going to come into compliance with the city's ordinance. They have to operate, and it only, if someone has to come into compliance with that to operate, then they're already in compliance. So while their rentals may have vested, it doesn't really matter because they're operating in compliance, right? But if they say, no, you know what, I don't want a city registration, that's when vesting becomes important, because they'd be saying, I'm already booked up. I'm already booked up for the next 6 months. I register with the state, so I'm a valid short-term rental. I've got 6 months of bookings. I don't want anything to do with the city. I'm done. That's okay. Here's my 6 months of bookings, and this ordinance, they're vested, and the ordinance doesn't really apply to them because they're not going to be operating anymore. But if they decide in the future, okay, I do want to continue to operate, they need to then register at that point.
Okay. I'll let that soak in.
Vesting is a bit complicated, and it's a bit tough to grasp, simply because, again, that was something that came out of case law and so forth, that, hey, if you're going to have agreements and they're in place before the ordinance, they have to be allowed to continue to operate regardless of whatever they do with the city. And it's hard to wrap your head around because it really only comes into play if they don't want to register with the city.
Right.
Okay? We all good?
we're good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Public comment?
Are we fixing to have public
Oh,
comment?
great. I was waiting for that part.
Okay, so we're done with the ordinance for now.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Before we go, so what's next as far as, I know what's next, I know what Andrew's gonna do, we get sent back, revision of this. When are we meeting again?
We're meeting on the 24th, to talk about the budget.
Right?
And then,
Yeah, this issue here.
we had set a date.
So next step is, Andrew, you make the changes and clean it up, right? And
Yes.
bring it back to us.
I guess the question is, when do you all want to review the changes as a council?
I'm not seeing this as taking real long to review the changes. Does anybody else?
No, just depending upon what we hear from the public and tweaking anything
Right.
in that realm.
Only down, I know August has already gotten pretty full, the August meeting.
Well, that's what I'm sitting here looking at. Today's 17th. We've got, basically 2 weeks left in this month. I mean, we could set us, if y'all agree, we could set a special meeting August 2nd. Now, that would be before any other meeting, because that's gonna be after.
Right. What I was thinking though is if it was, it doesn't sound like it's gonna be real time consuming to review it, if we could
No.
attach it to part of a regular workshop.
Yeah, we
Keep
could,
the, cost down, staff doesn't have to.
depending on what else is on that agenda.
Right.
No, I agree.
We'll wait till Mandy comes back and see if we can add it to the one on this.
I had a tentative budget workshop for Monday, the 24th. Does anyone know if that's a thing?
Yes,
Oh, it's happening.
it is, right.
It is
I
happening.
think 3 o'clock.
Okay.
Yeah, 3 o'clock on
I know that's only 1 week away, so maybe it's not enough time, but if we're going to be here
and that's the only thing we have that day.
at 3 o'clock.
I mean, we could move that back, since there's not another meeting that day. To like 4:30 or 5:30. I mean, I don't know what Jan's gonna cover.
Oh, what you
I
don't know is
didn't
what
know.
I'm gonna cover. Y'all getting ready to find out. I was gonna request it from Mandy, this, she has the information. I just
Okay.
want to get it put out to all of you also.
Okay.
So what day did we decide?
We had,
But I don't see why, I mean, if it takes a half an hour, we can add it to the 24th meeting.
yeah, that's fine with me.
Council, I won't be able to.
I don't know who get it all
The
rewritten.
ordinance on time.
Okay.
That's the reason I was
Yeah,
gonna-
you know what, right, seven.
That's the reason I was supposed to mark it all.
Right.
He's got a lot of rewriting to do.
Still on July 4th, maybe.
Mandy, we're throwing around times for when Andrew gets the revisions done to bring it back, and we're just throwing around when we might be able to schedule for it to have the review, to be able to move forward.
And we don't think the review is going to take very long, so we could attach it to a regular workshop.
In the regular workshops, so,
August 7th. I know you're not going to be here August 7th, so
Right, but I'll have gone through the reviews and I can mark mine up and send,
send your comments.
right?
works for me. And
How's the
it
work
depends on how
agenda
full
look?
that agenda is. On the 7th.
I've got a few things on there already.
We can do it in place of that project review,
We may have to kick that can down the road again.
especially since I didn't do it this weekend.
Falling down on a job there or something?
I did.
I can understand.
So far for August, I have Art Jones may want to make a presentation. We have an agreement to our, an amendment to our agreement with Swift Mud for the stormwater asset mapping project. RSA and optical tail agreements, a resolution addressing payment in lieu of health coverage through payroll, the Blue Run Park restroom agreement, if I have that ready to go. Tim's checklist, I still have to work on my evaluation format, which I have not done. Try to get that on for August. I'd like to start looking at a special event ordinance whenever y'all are ready. I'm just keeping that on my radar because we don't have anything in our code.
Right, thought we moved that one out till September, October, November timeframe.
We can. There was a JAG grant, easy, I think it's just ratification of mayor's signature on that grant agreement. And to talk about surplusing the lots that we own in Dunnellon Heights and disposing of those.
That's a lot.
That is a lot.
I think, what is, I mean, you're going the 7th, you're going the whole week.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I don't say we could do the Wednesday the 9th that same week.
Yeah, daughter's getting surgery.
Either
so-
that, or you could
Oh.
have another special workshop if Council Mendoza.
We could, I mean, it's fine with me.
Earlier that day,
Which day?
on the 7th. I mean, because sometimes you've done special workshops at like 3 in the afternoon prior to your regular workshop.
Yeah, we can do that.
You could consider
I'm
that.
thinking for 5 or 6 hours.
Right.
That makes a long day though.
I hate to create more meetings, but what about like Wednesday the 2nd, if it just is going to take like under an hour to look at this one thing?
Well, that's the reason I picked that day to start with. I picked the first week in August. because we don't have anything.
Can you be done by then, Andrew, or not?
I will have it done before the end of the month. So I'll definitely have a copy to you ahead. So on the 2nd, though, I do have another obligation. I have a meeting.
Okay.
How about the 3rd?
I was gonna say, what about the 3rd?
Well, what do you think, an hour? Do you think?
This is not, if we get it and we all study it and read it and get comfortable with it, well, this isn't gonna take long.
So
It's
what
just
if you
gonna
start-
wait, I didn't think we were doing that.
So where do you start at 4 o'clock on the 7th? If you think it's gonna be limited to an hour, hour and a half?
Up to y'all.
That's fine with me.
All right, we'll do it at 4 o'clock on the 7th.
You're gonna put your 2 cents in. All right.
We have to do what?
I was just making sure Tim was gonna have his 2 cents in. 7th.
You gonna be good on the 7th if we do it early?
Yeah, because I won't be here. I'll be in the hospital.
Well,
He'll
damn.
be putting his written,
You and I gotta quit going to the hospital. We can put it on the 15th and I'll be in the hospital.
I'm good for the 7th at 4.
Okay. But we can get your comments before then, right?
Right. Now, the other thing, what's driving the Blue Run Park one? I'm really hating missing that one.
It is,
And it's gonna be a tangled up one.
yeah,
Well, there's gonna be some back and forth now because Andrew is currently reviewing that draft document that the county sent to us. And Andrew has some
Is,
changes he's gonna make to that to send it back to the county.
Yeah, the biggest changes, I think, Mandy, I wanted to get with you on that, and I can share it with council if council would like. You know, the indemnification provision on there is one-sided, so it needs to, if we're gonna indemnify the county, they need to indemnify the city. But some of the other terms and so forth in there are really, it reads more like an MOU, and I think that really the edits are making sure what's stated, not that I think the county would state something inaccurate, but making sure that it's accurately reflected and maybe tying things in better to the agreement a bit better than being so. The agreement reads very non-specific, and I think that for everybody's understanding,
We're talking about a short-term rental ordinance, not other city business. We have to get home to our children. Can you please focus on this and let us do our public?
we are, we're trying to schedule another
You're talking about
short-term rental.
what? We're talking about,
Amber, we need to know this so that we can schedule
that
a
should have
short-term
been figured
rental.
out before this, folks. It's very disrespectful.
No, you're out of order.
Right.
Likewise.
Let's go. Is there a time pressure for the Blue Run Park? Is there a date that we have to meet as White's on the 7th is my question?
No?
Can we move that one out to the next month?
Yes.
Okay, and then bring the short-term rental ordinance in
Okay.
on the 7th, and I will have my stuff marked up and to everybody.
Okay.
All right. Now, we still gonna meet at 4 o'clock. Have a special meeting, or you're saying remove that and add short-term rental to the regular workshop?
Remove the Blue Run and add the short-term rental to the normal workshop.
Normal workshop.
Right.
Okay.
Great.
No additional
All
hours.
right, so we'll push that out and replace it with short-term rental.
That'll be at 4 o'clock.
5:30 now, right?
Yes.
5:30.
5:30.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. We all good with that?
I think so.
Okay. Now it's time for public comments, and I would ask people to please limit your comments to 3 minutes and address those comments to the chair.
Viola, Sophie?
You're going to be tired, Steve.
No.
Viola Soap, 18755, Southwest 60th Street, Dunnellon, Florida. Excuse me, Jan covered, touched on my first paragraph before I could even say it. Okay, let me bring this down. There are several types of short-term rentals in the town. Real estate offices manage a lot of short-term rentals for out-of-state owners as well as in-town owners. I used to work for a real estate company in Jupiter. We took care of over 150 short-term rental properties every year. I did it for over 10 years. I got burned out. If we're going to be required to comply, then the real estate offices as well as the Rainbow River Club should also have to comply. They also do the individual cabins as well as houses. So I would think they should follow the same rules as we do because it's cabins, it's individual properties, individual people, 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, just like we do. Plus annual fire and safety inspections, proof of their license, state and county sales tax, as well as all the other demands the city wants to place upon us. I placed a 3-page stapled thing on your desk, looks like this. The first page shows Rainbow River Club on the internet, and they're also on Verbo. And Verbo is a short-term rental software program, so they're complying with short-term rentals. That's why I thought they really should comply also, because if we have to, they should. This means the city would have to monitor between 50 and 70 individual properties annually. Also, the city is trying to find a way to back charge us for their expenses. If so, that also should include the real estate offices and Rainbow River Club. If we have to assume responsibility of your charges, they should have to assume this responsibility also. Now, the next half I have to blank out because I wasn't allowed to talk about it. There was a mention about who is allowed to get homestead exemption. This was a couple of weeks back. So I went out and checked, it's the second page that I gave you, and it says the only persons using a house as his primary residence can get homestead exemption. Rental and commercial properties are not eligible. And somebody made the comment that we were allowed to get homestead exemption, and we're not. We pay the full value of our property. I also gave the council a copy of my personal finances of my rental properties. That's page 3. You'll see at the bottom actually how much I made this year, everybody that was in my unit, how much they were charged, and the bottom line. Now, at the very bottom you see what I actually collected. Subtract $4,000 from my insurance. I have to put in $4,000 worth of insurance. Oops, I better hurry. $2,000 in taxes plus utilities. Now please tell me where my $1 million I was supposed to be making is, because I was told last time we're making $1 million. It said also I'm going to call Airbnb and see if there's any way I can get a copy of these leases that we do not get, because Airbnb does it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Roy Byerman?
Hello, my name is Roy Biederman. I live in New York. I bought a house down here a little while ago. With the help of the historic district, I fixed it up. It's on Powell Road, 20730 Powell Road. I thought today was pretty good. I know you went over a lot of stuff that you addressed that I think is important. I think there's some double registration between the state and the ordinance. Regarding trafficking, I think it's very important, but we just received guidance from the state about trafficking, how to train the people to clean the house, the front end, the management, myself. The online classes, the necessity to have a sign up, and all that was given to us by the state. So, it's a good thing, but it's also guidance from the state. I'm a little concerned about just the costs of double registration, so registering with the state and registering with the town. Everybody seems to be fairly reasonable here and has good common sense. Just trying to keep those costs in line so it's not overly burdensome. I would appreciate that. The background checks, I guess, was removed. I appreciate that because I think it also would have been another burden. But really, everything I had on my checklist, a lot of stuff you guys seem to hash out, and I do appreciate that. And I've been following along. This is my first time speaking. I know the previous not council, but the previous board had other issues, and there was a lot going on that I'm not really aware of the Florida politics. But I do appreciate everybody using, like I said, using some common sense. I like the idea of having the information available on the website. I think most vacation rental owners, short-term rental owners would have no problem posting all the information you guys want out there regard to environmental, animals. I think that's all a good thing. I have a book in the house which has the rules, it has the garbage, it has the local fire department, police department, hospital numbers, and I think most rental owners will be fine with that. I agree with Viola, what she said about just having a level playing field to everybody. You know, if you're going to hold us responsible, you know, hold the other, you know, real estate offices responsible, all the other short-term rentals responsible. And really, that's about it. I just want to thank you guys once again for using the common sense and you know, just really trying to help us in this way, because I know the previous administration was a little more difficult, but thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Amber Serena?
Amber Serena, 11426 Hendricks Drive. So we've all agreed tonight that vacation rentals are not commercial. Therefore, I don't believe fire inspections are included in the DBPR guidelines. I don't know if you all read this. It's really important. So from there, I'd like to just cover the Fourth Amendment. And it reads pretty simply that each man's home is his castle, secure from unreasonable searches and seizures of property by the government. It protects against arbitrary arrest and is the basis of the law regarding search warrants, stop and frisk, safety inspections. Okay? Next. If we want to talk about ADU buildings and that they are illegal, then there's a person in this room that has an illegal structure on their property. I'm also strongly considering redoing my minimum night of 3-night minimum to 1-night minimum so that my property is billed 365 days a year. I believe the building code that you are reading from is outdated. When I spoke to the building department, you might want to check on that. And I'd also like to formally ask that this council remove Kathy Dunn, wife of Mayor Wally Dunn, from Planning Commission immediately. Kathy Dunn is responsible for helping write this draft that her husband will vote on. This is corrupt, collusion at its finest, and a huge conflict of interest. Also, her best friend sits on this board. So with that, I realize you're trying to slam this down our throats by October 1 so that you avoid legal fees when we sue. I'd also like to read into record a letter from Bill White, who just sent in for the council members to read. And it says, Mayor and council members, as a resident and former mayor, I would like to again contribute my thoughts to the current topic of short-term rentals. The concept of creating an STR ordinance originated during my time as mayor well over a year ago when a resident brought the issue to city council's attention. The concern stated by the resident was the growing number of homes that were being used as short-term rentals with associated problems. It was also made clear that the city had no registry of the homes that were being used for STR purposes. City council's response was to direct staff to create an ordinance that would require registry with the city in order to operate. Included would be the requirement to show proof of having a state license and demonstrate paying bed taxes to Marion County. We also discussed including some very basic items such as number of people per bedroom and parking. This is what staff was directed to do. What came out of the community development was something far beyond what City Council had requested. The inclusion of enforcing state rules and regulations was not asked for. Neither was the requirement of having annual inspections of state requirements as a prerequisite to operate. Also, the previous City Council was not aware of the ongoing legal expenses nor authorized that. City Council was also not fully aware of the in-depth influence that an individual resident had in creating the draft that is now before you. In essence, the previous City Council simply wanted a registry with the city to know where, how many, and who own the homes being used for STR usage. We did not ask for what is currently in front of you. Simply put,
Mr. Chair, time?
we asked for a plain burger with small fries and a Diet Coke. What came out of the kitchen was a double quarter pounder with bacon and
Mr.
cheese,
Chair,
large fries, and a huge milkshake. You now essentially...
this is what happened in the planning meeting. We will not be accosted in this meeting. Thank you.
Your 3 minutes is up.
3
Sorry.
minutes are up. This is
All the
not
best,
one
Bill
of
White.
Okay, you guys?
Katie Geis, 12205 Palmetto Way.
I have two comments for consideration. One is, I know there's a big urgency to get to October 1st, and I'm wondering why, because the main issue with the new law is just providing transparency around the full cost and communicating that to the public. And I've heard your budget meetings, and I know that everyone on this board is very fiscally disciplined, and you're looking to have a very tight budget. You know the constraints that the city is under. And so I've heard you talk about assessing the full cost and the benefits of doing this type of ordinance. So I would urge that now is not the time to try to rush and rush something and approve it and make a commitment to something before you fully understand the full cost impact of the ordinance. Direct costs, indirect costs, long-term, short-term. Let me give you a couple of examples of costs that I see coming. And this is perfectly timed with the budget hearings as well. But the direct cost to the city, legal fees is going to be one. We expect with over $10,000 so far, we know that more legal fees will be to come. Building this registration program and inspection and compliance program, that will be increased costs from the website hosting company, Granicus. There will be increased costs for document retention and document storage. All of those things, we should be able to get estimates and be able to put that in the budget. IT support costs will increase. This is much more of an interactive website that you're suggesting that we're implementing that will have IT implications. There'll be labor costs for public works to be enforcing this and inspecting it. Higher costs administratively to be managing this program. So these are the types of costs that are not unforeseen, but can be and should be planned for. The direct cost to STR owners is a whole separate category of costs. And we haven't, I won't even go there right now, but in addition to all of our costs for licensing and costs for fire safety inspections and fire extinguisher certifications annually, those costs are adding up. Indirect costs to the city are really important for the city residents to understand. These are the costs long-term of declining property values with more restrictions and more regulations put on short-term rentals. Declining property values, which then has a lower tax base of what you would receive property taxes on. So therefore lower property taxes as well. Declining business revenues, that is a factor. When there's fewer places for visitors to go to, there's going to be fewer revenues. Fewer jobs for the local economy as STRs are closing if they cannot be compliant with all of these new regulations. So I urge you to think about all these costs and to please think about that for your budget impact in advance of your approval of the city ordinance.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I don't have anyone else signed up, but I have a couple on Zoom.
Okay.
Barb Hale?
Yes, hi, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, my name is Barb Heil, 12193 Palmetto Way. Our DBPR license is current and active. We appreciate the extra work you are doing to make this ordinance fair and not cumbersome on us STR owners versus other businesses, and working to correct things that current council inherited. I heard it said today that much of the items in the ordinance can't be done without adding staff, which I would think would increase the cost for the city and taxpayers, and that some things could be stricken because the owners will file for a permit and the city would know about changes versus doing actual property inspections. As an example of that, here's the situation that we're in. We can't get a permit to place a shed on our property. Over the past 6 months, we've been working with some really nice people at the city and still have no shed permit, which has caused us to incur extra expenses for off-premises storage. Several reasons for not being able to secure a permit have been given to us. We have been told that the city had to hire a professional planning consultant to review ordinances where the subject matter in the code does not pertain to the code number, and that it was going to take months to get to those issues. We were also told that there is no basis in code for the placement of a shed on our property, and that an attorney clarified an exception or variance is not applicable, as our case does not meet the criteria for a variance. So as of now, there are codes that override each other, and we have been told we cannot place a shed in our backyard or in our front yard. What are we supposed to do? Our street is lined with sheds, most all in the front yards, as we are in a river corridor protection area and cannot place sheds in the backyard. Just a short cruise upriver will show many sheds, outbuildings, and auxiliary houses right on the bank. It seems quite obvious that the city can't handle a simple shed permit without hiring consultants and incurring legal fees. We respectfully ask that the city look to correcting the current codes so we can get our shed permit as quickly as you are trying to reconvene and rewrite the short-term rental ordinance. Respectfully, this looks like remodeling the inside of the house when your roof is leaking. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Meg Phillips?
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Meg Phillips, 12055 Palmetto Way. Just as someone, as a homeowner and taxpaying citizen who's been involved in this process from the very beginning, it's a little bit frustrating to have to go through and rehash all of these items out with a new group of people who were not involved in the original discussions. For example, as we listened to you guys discuss the maximum number of people and the definitions of bedrooms, I'm reminded back to the original discussions on these topics where comments from civilians were not only welcome, but we were allowed to speak throughout the meeting where comments applied. And it's painful, to say the least, to hear you guys kind of stumble through this discussions with your assumptions without any kind of continuity or clarity or explanation as to why these things were put in place to begin with. So, for example, the reason that the exception for children, the age of young children, was originally put into the maximum number of occupants is because in the original language, it limited the number of people per bedroom rather than just acknowledging the 16-person maximum. And the reason that the language about the definition of a bedroom was put in there to be a little different is because there are houses that have multiple bedrooms without closets. So while my personal house doesn't meet those qualifications, I know, for example, that there's a 6-bedroom house that none of the bedrooms have closets because short-term rentals don't really need closets. So it's unreasonable to think that a 6-bedroom house can only have a maximum of 2 guests because you don't agree that the bedrooms are a bedroom if they don't have a closet. But that is what your current draft, as you discussed today, would allow. The discussion about children was originally around the fact that small children may choose to share a room with their parents. So if you eliminate children from the 2-person bedroom rule, but still require that no more than 16 people of any age should be allowed on the property, that's what we originally discussed. So the idea was that you would allow 2-person per bedroom plus an additional 2 people, excluding children under the age of 6. But allow no more than 16 people of any age total to occupy the property due to the codes. So, for example, my house, I have a very large 4-bedroom house, and each of the 4 bedrooms is a master bedroom with its own private bathroom. We market that it sleeps 16 people, because that's what we sleep. When we personally visit, we often go with 3 other families, and we have 2 adults in each bedroom and a couple of kids in each bedroom with their parents. And under the current ordinance, our house would only be allowed to house 10. So those are some things that you guys changed and I think were very overlooked and I'm very concerned about. The other thing that I'm concerned about is just the sheer amount of wasted time that we're dealing with to go through this again. So I think it's important that no one is asking, is this ordinance worth it? As you go through these discussions, you're asking, is it legal? Are we allowed to do this? Just because you're allowed to do it doesn't mean that you should. Are short-term rentals causing such an issue that it's worth?
You wrap it up, your 3 minutes is up.
So I just ask that at your hearing on the 24th, you will really consider the damages. And I don't just mean proposed damages or what you imagine could happen, but as one of the board members said, you should look at the actual facts. What damages have actually been done by short-term rentals and put them side by side with the tens of thousands of dollars that you will spend if you move forward. And someone needs to ask the question, is this worth it, and vote on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Raymond Rice?
Raymond Rice, 11760 Cherokee Circle. In listening to everything that's happened, we've been part of the discussions for a couple years now. It seems obvious to me that the people on the council really have not met in person with STR owners. A lot of the issues that we are having could be discussed outside of the chambers so that we're not wasting the city council's time or any other STR owner's time. There's a lot of assumptions that are being made by the city council. It seems to me that no one on the city council is an STR owner. One of the points that was made was a 2-hour time frame of being on site for a complaint. First of all, I'm not sure what complaint has to be addressed in person. I work for a critical infrastructure that if we have a hurricane, I'm not going to be able to leave for weeks. I will work 18-hour days. I will be sleeping on premises of my job. I cannot get up and go because of a issue that could be taken care of over a phone. We do not have an agent. We are owners of the house. We take care of the business ourselves. We can't call someone and show up on our behalf. It's going to be us. We live 2 hours away. And best case scenario, if we left the moment we got a phone call without any traffic, we could get there in 2 hours. So by placing a 2-hour limit or being fined or not compliant, I do not understand the purpose of that 2-hour on-site issue. What cannot be taken care of over a phone? If I'm registered with the city and you have my phone number and you call me, why can't I give you permission to do what needs to be done?
Are you going to let my house burn down?
On site. The other thing, again, is the #1 industry in Dunnellon is tourism. That's it. That's the #1 industry. There's no factories. Everything is tied either to people that are living there to take care of their life or tourism. And by eliminating or making it more difficult for tourism, you are hurting the infrastructure of the city. Tourists bring money into the city. They bring money from outside the city and bring it into the city. Homeowners spending money in the city. You want money to take care of things, you need to bring it in from outside sources. And that's what STR owners do, is they bring in that money from outside of the city. Please, before the next meeting, the city council members, talk with some of the STR owners. Invite them to a restaurant, talk about what needs to be addressed so that that we can make this a more streamlined procedure.
There's no issues documented.
You know, as far as I know, we have never had an issue with us. I don't know any other STR owner that's had any issues. The only issues that have been brought up are by the city council members that have had non-favorable experiences with STR clients, not necessarily the owners.
Your 3 minutes is up. Could you wrap it up?
That is what I wanted to say. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, ma'am. Take care.
I have someone registered with a telephone number.
Hi, this is Brock Geist, 12205 Palmetto Way. Can you guys hear me okay?
Can you speak up just a little bit? Yes.
Okay. Brock Geist, 12205 Palmetto Way.
Maybe back up just a little.
Sorry, it's a cell phone. I don't know what else I can do. I don't have any earpieces in.
Okay, that's good.
Okay, this works?
Yes.
Okay, apologies. Two things, hopefully you guys can still hear after I blew your eardrums out. Number one, and I apologize, I missed some of the meeting earlier, but I noticed that you guys added the word apply to the initial registration section. I think the change was every vacation rental owner shall apply first. I'm just curious what that means. I mean, obviously there's going to be information that is transmitted to us, which I think you guys did a pretty good job of outlining that and narrowing some things down. But application often means that there's someone on the other end that's reviewing and potentially denying it. So through what lens will somebody be, going through and looking at each of these materials, and what grounds might they have for denying it? Who would that person be? What role in the city? Hopefully you guys will clarify that either tonight or in the next round, because that, in addition to just the uncertainty that it presents to us, that there's cost involved as well. And then the other piece is around the fire code, fire inspections. I think there was some back and forth on whether there should be explicit requirements in the ordinance or just referring to, the 2 or 3 or 4 different state codes, which are very voluminous and hard to interpret. I personally like the explicit wording that was in there currently. I think it's pretty reasonable, especially the part about having a 10-year battery instead of hardwired. I mean, there's a lot of things that we could waste money on here trying to, comply with certain requirements. We would rather reinvest that in, riverfront cleanup, et cetera. The Department of Business and Professional Regulation has a nice pamphlet that actually lays out their requirements in layman's terms. We have a copy of that, maybe you guys do. We can provide that to you, but it's called the Vacation Rentals and Timeshare Project, and it lists out a few things. Electrical and wiring must be in good repair. Smoke alarms must be installed in every living unit. A fire extinguisher must be present. So these are all practical things that I think most of our owners would already comply with and would be comfortable with accepting. But it's important for us to know what we're in for, and I think some council members reference that, and we appreciate that. I think we just all want to be on the same page here. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do not have anyone else on Zoom.
Okay. Anybody else in the audience want to speak? Okay. Brenda, oh, I'm sorry. I can't see Brenda, so.
Brenda Diarra, 11661 Camp Drive, Dunnellon. I just had a couple of questions. So I'm addressing, I know in the past for the planning commission, when we wanted certain things to be put on the website, and there was a discussion about the pamphlet, we were told repeatedly we would not be able to because we didn't have the ability to make it ADA compliant. Has that been resolved?
Well, it would depend on, I don't know specifically what you're talking about.
When you were discussing putting it on the website, the information?
Right. It depends on how it's created. The problem that we have with ADA compliance is a lot of times if you take a scan of a document, it's hard to make that ADA compliant. But if you start with a brand new document and convert it to a PDF,
Okay.
then there's no issue with compliance.
So I was just bringing that point up. We were talking about having that to help support our STR owners on the website. Secondly, and I was going to bring up again that time frame on page 10. That was the discussion about the reasonable time versus the 2 hours. Is there a workaround with that? Because I do agree, if the owner is, in another state, obviously they can't come within the 2 hours. And we did list there on line 28 that there could only be one responsible party. So would there be a workaround where technically the owner could still be the responsible party, but could designate somebody more local to act on their behalf? I don't know if that's that legal language or like a trusted contact. I don't know if that could be addressed, but I think that would be maybe something you might want to revisit. The other two issues I have already been addressed, and I do say I totally support Katie Geis's recommendation to really try to get some good estimates of cost before we finalize. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? We all good? I get a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?